The night Jonas Mercer opened his door to two desperate strangers, he had no idea he was inviting death itself onto his land. What began as a simple act of mercy would explode into a violent showdown that would test every ounce of courage he had left. This is the story of a broken rancher, two children running from murder, and the gunfight that changed everything. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The September wind carried dust and dying light across Jonas Mercer's ranch, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. He stood on his porch, one weathered hand wrapped around a tin cup of coffee gone cold, the other resting near the Winchester that hadn't left his side in 15 years. The land stretched before him, 300 acres of stubborn grass, rocky soil, and memories that wouldn't stay buried no matter how deep he tried to dig. Jonas was 53 years old, though his face told the story of a much harder life. Deep lines carved paths from the corners of his eyes, tributaries of grief that no amount of whiskey or solitude could wash away. His hair, once the color of wheat, had gone silver at the temples. His hands were scarred from wire, rope, and one terrible night he refused to remember in daylight. The ranch house behind him stood like a monument to everything he'd lost. 2 stories of weathered pine, a wraparound porch that Sarah had insisted on, windows that caught the morning sun just the way she'd planned. But Sarah was 6 years gone, buried on the hill beneath the cottonwood tree. And their daughter, Emma, God, Emma would have been 19 now. Would have been. Those 2 words carried more weight than any gravestone. Jonas took a sip of cold coffee and grimaced. The taste matched his mood. He was about to head inside when he saw them, 2 figures moving along the fence line where the property met the county road. At first he thought it was a trick of the failing light, shadows playing games the way they did at dusk. But as he watched, the figures became clearer. A girl, tall and thin, leading a horse that could barely walk. And on that horse, slumped forward like a sack of grain, a smaller figure, a boy. Jonas set down his cup and picked up the Winchester, not aiming it, just holding it. Out here, you learn to be careful. The West had rules, and the first rule was trust nobody until they gave you reason to. He stepped off the porch, his boots crunching on the gravel, and waited. The girl saw him and stopped. Even from 20 yards away, Jonas could see the exhaustion etched into her posture. Shoulders hunched, head lowered, every step an act of will. The horse beside her was in worse shape, ribs showing through dull brown hide, head hanging so low its nose nearly touched the ground. The boy on its back didn't move. "That's far enough," Jonas called out, his voice carrying across the empty space between them. "State your business." The girl raised her head. In the dying light, Jonas couldn't make out her features clearly, but he could hear the exhaustion in her voice when she spoke. "Please," she said. The word came out cracked, desperate. "Can we sleep in your barn?" Jonas felt something twist in his chest. It was the "we" that got him. The way she said it with such fierce protectiveness, like she was ready to fight God himself for this boy. He'd heard that tone before, in Sarah's voice, in Emma's. It was the sound of someone who'd put everything on the line for family. He should have said no. Every instinct sharpened by years of loss and loneliness told him to send them on their way, to protect himself from whatever trouble they were carrying. In the West, trouble had a way of spreading like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. These 2 were strangers, and strangers meant complications. But Jonas Mercer had been a stranger once, stumbling through a snowstorm with Sarah in his arms, her pregnant belly pressed between them, their supplies lost in a river crossing gone wrong. And old Henry Clayton had opened his door, asked no questions, and saved 3 lives that night, Jonas, Sarah, and the daughter who would be born 3 days later beside Henry's fireplace. Jonas lowered the rifle. "Barn's cold," he said, his voice gruff. "There's a room inside, my daughter's old one. You can sleep there tonight." The girl's head snapped up, and Jonas saw her face clearly for the first time. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17, dark hair tangled around a face that was all sharp angles and hollow cheeks. Her eyes, though. Her eyes held something ancient and terrible, the kind of knowledge that children should never have. "Why?" she asked, and there was suspicion in her voice, hard-earned and justified. "Why would you do that?" Jonas thought about lying, about making up some story that would satisfy her without revealing too much of himself. But something in her gaze demanded honesty. "Because someone once helped me," he said simply. "Come on, before that horse collapses." He turned and walked back toward the house, not looking to see if they followed. Behind him, he heard the slow crunch of hooves on gravel, the shuffle of exhausted feet. When he reached the porch, he finally glanced back. The girl had managed to coax the horse forward, one hand on its bridle, the other steadying the boy on its back. Up close, the boy looked even worse, maybe 12 years old, his face pale beneath a layer of dirt, his breathing shallow and rapid. "He's sick?" Jonas asked, nodding toward the boy. "Fever," the girl said shortly. "Started yesterday. He'll be fine." The way she said it, Jonas knew she was trying to convince herself as much as him. He'd heard that tone before, too, the desperate optimism of someone watching something precious slip away. "Get him inside," Jonas said. "I'll take care of the horse." The girl hesitated, then nodded. She helped the boy down from the horse with surprising gentleness, supporting his weight as he stumbled. Jonas watched them climb the porch steps, the boy's feet dragging, the girl's jaw set with determination. Then he turned his attention to the horse. The animal was in bad shape, dehydrated, half-starved, hooves worn down to nothing. Jonas led it to the barn, moving slowly, speaking in low tones. He gave it water first, just a little, knowing too much too fast would make it sick. Then he mixed up a warm mash of grain and molasses, something gentle on a shrunken stomach. While the horse ate, Jonas checked its legs, its teeth, its eyes. This had been a good animal once, well-trained and well-cared for. Whatever had happened to these kids, it had happened fast and hard enough to leave no time for proper preparation. When he finally made it back to the house, he found them in the kitchen. The girl sat at the table, ramrod straight despite her obvious exhaustion, her eyes tracking Jonas's every movement. The boy slumped in his chair, head resting on the table, his breathing labored. Jonas moved to the stove without a word. He'd made stew that morning, more out of habit than hunger, and there was plenty left. He ladled out 2 bowls, added thick slices of bread, and set them on the table. Then he poured 2 glasses of milk from the icebox and stepped back, giving them space. The girl stared at the food like it might disappear if she looked away. Her hand trembled as she picked up the spoon. Beside her, the boy lifted his head, drawn by the smell, and Jonas saw his face clearly for the first time. Same dark hair as the girl, same sharp features. Siblings, no question. But where the girl's eyes were hard with suspicion, the boy's held nothing but exhaustion and pain. "Eat," Jonas said, settling into a chair across from them. "Then we'll get the boy settled. He needs rest more than food right now." The girl took a bite, and Jonas watched her face transform. She'd been trying so hard to hold everything together, to be strong, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let go. Now, with hot food in her belly and a roof over her head, some of that terrible tension began to ease from her shoulders. They ate in silence, and Jonas let them. He understood that words could be dangerous, that questions could feel like interrogations when you were running from something. Instead, he just sat there, hands wrapped around his own cup of coffee, and waited. When they'd finished, Jonas showed them to Emma's room. He hadn't been in there in 6 months, maybe longer, couldn't bear it. But now he opened the door and gestured them inside. The room was exactly as Emma had left it. Bed made with Sarah's quilts, books stacked on the nightstand, curtains drawn back from windows that looked out over the south pasture. The girl helped the boy onto the bed, pulling off his worn boots, covering him with a quilt. She moved with practiced efficiency, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. When the boy's eyes closed, his breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep, she finally allowed herself to relax. "Thank you," she said, not looking at Jonas. "We'll be gone in the morning." Jonas nodded. "Door's unlocked if you need anything. Bathroom's down the hall. There's clean water in the pitcher." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Why?" she asked again, and this time the question carried a different weight. "Why help us? You don't know us, don't know what we're running from." Jonas stood in the doorway, his back to her, one hand on the frame. In the dim light of the hallway, he looked older than his years, worn down by grief and loneliness. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly. "Emma."
She was about your age. I'd like to think if she'd ever needed help, if she'd ever been desperate and alone, someone would have done for her what I'm doing for you." He didn't wait for a response, just pulled the door closed and walked back to the kitchen. He stood at the window for a long time, watching the moon rise over the distant mountains, thinking about Sarah and Emma and all the ways a man's life could break apart. In Emma's room, the girl, whose name was Ellie, though Jonas didn't know that yet, sat on the edge of the bed and watched her brother sleep. Sam was 12 years old, and he was all she had left in the world. Their parents were dead, murdered by the man who should have protected them. And now that man's hired guns were hunting them across 3 territories, determined to finish what they'd started. Ellie had thought they were far enough away, that the miles and the mountains would keep them safe, but she'd been wrong before, and wrong always costs something. She looked around Emma's room, taking in the books and the quilts, and the careful way everything had been preserved, and she felt tears burning behind her eyes for the first time in weeks. This stranger, this rancher, with storm-cloud eyes and hands that moved with such gentle competence, had given them more than shelter. He'd given them a moment of peace in a world that had become nothing but running and fear and the constant weight of responsibility. Ellie knew they couldn't stay, knew that staying would only bring trouble to this man who'd lost so much already. But for tonight, for just one night, she let herself pretend they were safe. Sam stirred in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Ellie smoothed the hair back from his forehead and felt the heat radiating from his skin. The fever was worse than she'd admitted to Jonas. Much worse. But there was nothing to be done about it now except wait and hope and pray to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. Outside, the September night deepened. Coyotes called to each other in the distance, their voices carrying across the empty land. In the barn, the horse dozed in its stall, finally safe after days of desperate flight. And in the kitchen, Jonas Mercer sat at his table with a bottle of whiskey he wouldn't open and a rifle he couldn't put down, wondering what kind of trouble he'd just invited through his door. The wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of coming rain. Jonas closed his eyes and thought about choices, about the moments that defined a man's life. He'd made a choice 15 years ago when he'd turned away from Emma's cries for help, too wrapped up in his grief over Sarah to see that his daughter was drowning in her own pain. He'd found her 3 days later in the barn, a rope around her neck, a note that said simply, "I'm sorry, Daddy. I couldn't carry it anymore." Jonas had carried that guilt every day since. Carried it in the way he worked himself to exhaustion, in the way he'd driven away every person who tried to get close, in the way he'd built walls around his heart so high and thick that nothing could get through. But tonight, when he'd seen that girl standing in his yard with her dying brother and her desperate question, something in those walls had cracked. Maybe it was too late to save Emma. Maybe it was too late to go back and make different choices. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to do something right. Jonas opened his eyes and looked out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, whatever these kids were running from was still hunting. He could feel it in his bones, the way he could feel weather changing or trouble coming. And when it arrived, because it would arrive, trouble always did, Jonas Mercer would be ready. He picked up the Winchester and began cleaning it, his movements automatic, born of years of practice. The metal gleamed in the lamplight, and Jonas thought about what Henry Clayton had told him all those years ago. Sometimes saving others is the only way to save yourself. Jonas hadn't understood it then, but sitting in his kitchen with 2 desperate strangers sleeping in his dead daughter's room, he was beginning to understand it now. The night deepened. The wind grew stronger, and in the darkness beyond the ranch, something stirred, something cruel and determined, something that wouldn't stop until it got what it came for. But tonight, for just tonight, 2 children slept safe under Jonas Mercer's roof. And for the first time in 6 years, the house didn't feel quite so empty. In Emma's room, Ellie finally allowed herself to close her eyes. Sam's fever raged beside her, but at least they were inside. At least they were warm. At least they had one more night before the running started again. She thought about the rancher's words, "Because someone once helped me," and wondered what kind of pain a man had to endure to understand theirs so completely without asking a single question. She thought about his daughter, the one who was about your age, and the past tense he'd used that told her everything she needed to know about loss. Tomorrow, they would leave.
They had to leave. Because staying meant bringing death to this man's door, and he'd suffered enough already. But tonight, Ellie let herself feel what she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks: gratitude. The rain began just after midnight, soft at first, then harder. It drummed against the roof and streamed down the windows, washing the dust from the world. Jonas listened to it from his chair in the kitchen, the rifle across his lap, his eyes on the door. He'd meant what he said about not knowing them, not knowing what they were running from. But he was a rancher who'd lived in the West all his life, and he knew desperation when he saw it, knew the look of people who'd been hunted. Whatever was chasing these kids was serious enough to put a gun in their future if he didn't do something about it. The question was, what could one broken rancher do against whatever darkness was following them? Jonas didn't have an answer yet, but he had the night to think about it, and he had a rifle that had never failed him. And maybe, just maybe, he had something else too, a reason to care about something beyond his own grief for the first time in 6 years. The rain fell harder, turning the yard into mud, making the roads treacherous. Good, Jonas thought. Whatever was coming would have a harder time getting here in this weather. It bought them time. He settled back in his chair and kept watch, the way he'd kept watch over Sarah when she was pregnant with Emma, the way he'd kept watch over Emma when she was small and the fever came, the way he'd failed to keep watch when it mattered most. Not this time, Jonas promised himself. Not again. The storm raged through the night, and Jonas Mercer sat in his kitchen with a rifle and a prayer, waiting for morning and whatever it would bring. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the world clean and new. Jonas woke in his chair, the Winchester still across his lap, his neck stiff from sleeping upright. Gray light filtered through the kitchen windows, and for a moment he just sat there, listening to the silence of the house. Then he remembered. The children. He rose carefully, joints protesting, and moved down the hallway. Emma's door was still closed. Jonas pressed his ear against the wood and heard nothing. No movement, no voices, just the kind of stillness that made his chest tighten with old fear. He knocked softly. "It's Jonas. Just checking on you." Silence. Then the sound of footsteps, quick and light. The door opened a crack, and Ellie's face appeared, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "He's worse," she whispered. "The fever won't break." Jonas pushed the door open wider. In the pale morning light, Sam looked small and fragile beneath Sarah's quilts. His face was flushed, his breathing rapid and shallow. Jonas crossed the room and placed the back of his hand against the boy's forehead. The heat radiating from his skin made Jonas's jaw tighten. "How long has he been like this?" 3 days, Ellie said, and her voice cracked on the words. "Maybe 4. I lost track." Jonas studied the boy more carefully now, noting the way his shirt stuck to his chest, the tremor in his hands. Then he saw it, a dark stain on Sam's left side, barely visible beneath his shirt. Jonas reached for the fabric and Ellie's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. "Don't," she said, but there was no strength behind it, just fear. "I need to see it," Jonas said gently. "Whatever it is, hiding it won't make it better." Ellie's hand fell away. Jonas carefully lifted Sam's shirt and felt his stomach drop. A wound, maybe 4 inches long, ran along the boy's ribs. Someone had tried to stitch it, crude, uneven stitches that pulled the skin together but didn't seal it properly. The flesh around it was angry and red, infection spreading like poison through the boy's system. "Jesus," Jonas breathed. "How did this happen?" Ellie turned away, her shoulders rigid. "Does it matter?" "It does if you want me to help him." For a long moment, Ellie said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet Jonas had to lean in to hear it, she said, "Our uncle's man. He had a knife. Sam got between us." Jonas felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. A 12-year-old boy with a knife wound, running across open territory with nothing but his sister to protect him. The story wrote itself in his mind, and he didn't like any of the chapters. "I need to clean this properly," Jonas said, standing. "The stitches are infected. I'll have to take them out, drain the wound, and start over. It's going to hurt him." "Will he live?" Ellie asked, and the nakedness in her voice, the raw terror of someone who'd already lost everything and couldn't bear to lose more, made Jonas think of Emma, of that last terrible morning. "If we do this right," Jonas said, "if we're lucky, but I need to start now." He left the room and returned with his medical kit, a battered leather bag that had seen him through broken bones, animal bites, and once Sarah's difficult labor with Emma. He set it on the nightstand and began laying out supplies: clean cloth, a bottle of whiskey, needle and thread, a sharp knife that he'd sterilized in boiling water. "You should wait outside," Jonas told Ellie. "No," she said firmly. "He's my brother. I stay." Jonas nodded. He'd expected nothing less. "Then hold his shoulders. When I start, he's going to fight." Sam's eyes fluttered open as Jonas poured whiskey over the wound. The boy's scream tore through the quiet house, and Jonas felt it like a knife to his own gut. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. He worked quickly, cutting away the infected stitches, draining the pus and blood, cleaning the wound with steady hands while Sam thrashed and Ellie held him down, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Jonas murmured as he worked. "I'm sorry, son. Just a little more." By the time he finished, fresh stitches neat and clean, the wound properly dressed, Sam had passed out from the pain. Jonas covered him with the quilt and stepped back, his hands shaking now that it was done. "He'll sleep for a while," Jonas said. "The fever should start to break in a few hours if the infection doesn't spread." Ellie sagged against the wall, her face gray with exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. Jonas started to respond, but movement caught his eye. Through Emma's window, he could see the yard, the barn, and beyond that the fence line where he'd first spotted them yesterday. And there, in the early morning light, he saw something that made his blood run cold. "Get away from the window," he said quietly. Ellie's head snapped up. "What? Now!" Jonas grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the glass. "Someone's out there, on the ridge." He moved to the window carefully, staying to the side where he couldn't be seen. The figure was distant, maybe half a mile away, but Jonas's eyes were still sharp. A man on horseback, sitting perfectly still, watching the house. As Jonas stared, the figure turned and rode away, disappearing over the ridge. "Did they see us?" Ellie's voice was tight with panic. "Maybe," Jonas said. "Probably. Depends on how long they were there before I noticed them." Ellie's face went white. "We have to leave. Now, before they come back with..." "With what?" Jonas asked, turning to face her. "More men? Guns? You think you'll get 10 feet with your brother in his condition? You think that horse of yours can outrun fresh mounts?" "Then what do you suggest?" Ellie demanded, and there was anger in her voice now, born of fear and desperation. "We stay here and wait for them to kill us? Kill you?" Jonas looked at Sam, small and fevered in Emma's bed, then back at Ellie. He thought about the choices that defined a man's life, about the moment 15 years ago when Henry Clayton had opened his door to strangers, about the moment 6 years ago when he'd been too wrapped up in his own pain to see Emma's. "We prepare," Jonas said, "and we pray we're wrong about what's coming." But they weren't wrong. They both knew it. Jonas spent the morning turning his house into a fortress. He boarded up windows on the ground floor, leaving just enough space to see out, and if necessary, shoot through. He brought water barrels inside, checked his ammunition, and made sure every rifle and pistol he owned was loaded and ready. Ellie worked beside him, silent and efficient, her movements quick despite her exhaustion. "You know how to shoot?" Jonas asked as he handed her a Winchester. "My father taught me," Ellie said, and her voice went hard on the word father. "Before our uncle killed him." Jonas stopped what he was doing. "Tell me," he said. "All of it. If I'm going to help you, I need to know what we're facing." Ellie set down the rifle and stared at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reciting facts rather than her own history. "Our father owned land, good land, with water rights. When our mother died 3 years ago, his brother, our uncle, started visiting more often. Said he wanted to help, said families should stick together." She paused, her jaw working. 6 weeks ago, our father told us he was selling the land. Said he wanted to move us somewhere safer, somewhere we could start over. That night, our uncle came to the house with 3 men. They shot our father in his own kitchen, while Sam and I hid in the cellar. Jonas felt sick. "And your uncle?" "Forged documents saying our father had sold him the land before he died. Said our father drank too much, got into a fight with drifters, got himself killed. The sheriff believed him, or pretended to. Ellie's hands curled into fists. We ran that night, took what we could carry and ran, and they've been hunting us ever since. Why? Jonas asked. If your uncle has the land, why keep hunting you? Ellie looked up at him, and her eyes were full of dark knowledge. Because I have papers, real papers, hidden in my saddlebag. Proof that our father never sold anything, that he was planning to report our uncle for trying to force the sale. With those papers, we can prove everything. Without us, she trailed off, but Jonas understood. Without them, there was no one left to tell the truth. Your uncle, Jonas said slowly. What's his name? Marcus Reeves. Jonas felt the name land like a physical blow. Marcus Reeves. He'd heard that name before, whispered in saloons and trading posts. A land grabber with connections to territorial officials, a man who'd built an empire on forged deeds and convenient deaths. If Reeves was behind this, then Ellie and Sam weren't just running from family trouble. They were running from something much bigger and much more dangerous. How many men does he have? Jonas asked. I've seen at least 6, Ellie said, but there might be more. The one who cut Sam, his name is Cole. He wears a deputy's badge, but he's not law. He's just one of Reeves's hired killers. Jonas nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. The figure on the ridge this morning, that had been a scout, someone checking to see if the tracks they'd followed had led to this ranch. By now that scout would be reporting back to Cole, and Cole would be gathering men. We have maybe a day, Jonas said. 2 if we're lucky. Then they'll come. You should turn us in, Ellie said suddenly. Tell them you found us. Collect whatever reward they're offering. You don't owe us anything. Jonas looked at her for a long moment. She was trying to sound tough, trying to give him an out, but he could see the fear in her eyes, the desperate hope that he'd say no. I had a daughter, Jonas said quietly. Emma. She was 17 when she died. Hung herself in the barn because I was too wrapped up in my own grief to see she was drowning. He paused, the words still painful even after 6 years. Every day since then, I've wondered what I could have done different, what I should have seen. Your brother's upstairs fighting for his life, and you're standing here trying to protect me from trouble I invited in willingly. So no, I won't turn you in, and I won't let them take you. Ellie stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk everything for us? Jonas thought about Henry Clayton, about the debt he'd never been able to repay because Henry had died 2 winters after Emma was born, about the way guilt and grief could eat a man alive if he let them. Because someone once helped me, Jonas said, and because I couldn't save my daughter. But maybe I can save you. The afternoon passed in tense preparation. Jonas rode to his nearest neighbor, Jacob Miller, a quiet man who lived 3 miles east. He told Jacob enough to make him understand that trouble was coming, asked if he'd keep watch, and spread the word to the other ranchers in the valley. Jacob listened without interrupting, then nodded once. I'll get the word out, Jacob said. We look after our own out here, and that includes anyone under your roof. Jonas felt something loosen in his chest. In the West, a man's neighbors were his lifeline. If things went bad, knowing Jacob and the others were watching might make all the difference. When Jonas returned to the ranch, he found Ellie sitting beside Sam's bed, holding her brother's hand. The boy was still unconscious, but his breathing seemed easier, less labored. The fever hadn't broken yet, but it hadn't gotten worse either. How is he? Jonas asked from the doorway. Fighting, Ellie said. He's always been a fighter. Jonas nodded. He started to leave, but Ellie's voice stopped him. Jonas? It was the first time she'd used his name. That man on the ridge this morning. If he reports back to Cole, they'll know we're here. They'll know you're helping us. I expect they will, Jonas said. And you're still going to fight? Jonas looked at Emma's room, the books, the quilts, the life that had been cut short by pain and isolation. He thought about all the ways he'd failed his daughter, all the chances he'd missed to tell her she mattered, that she was loved, that the darkness she felt wasn't permanent. I'm still going to fight, Jonas said. Night fell, and with it came a different kind of silence. Jonas sat in the kitchen with the Winchester across his lap, listening to the sounds of the house. Upstairs, Ellie moved quietly between Emma's room and the bathroom. In the barn, the horse they'd brought stood in its stall, finally starting to recover. And somewhere out in the darkness, men were planning. Jonas knew how this would go. Cole would come with enough men to make resistance seem pointless. He'd offer terms, give up the children, walk away clean. When Jonas refused, they'd try to take them by force. And Jonas would fight, because that's what a man did when evil came calling. He fought, even if the odds were impossible. Around midnight, Jonas heard footsteps on the stairs. Ellie appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale in the lamplight. "I can't sleep," she said. "Every time I close my eyes, I see—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Your father," Jonas said gently. Ellie nodded. "He tried to fight them. He grabbed his rifle, but there were too many. And Cole just smiled while he—" Her voice broke. "Sam thinks it's his fault. He thinks if he'd been stronger, faster, he could have stopped it. That's why he jumped in front of that knife. He's trying to make up for something that was never his fault to begin with." Jonas understood that kind of guilt, understood the way it could poison everything, turning every moment into a reminder of failure. He'd lived with it for 6 years, and it had nearly destroyed him. "When I found Emma," Jonas said, surprising himself by speaking the words aloud, "I thought I'd die from the grief. Thought my heart would just stop beating because I couldn't stand the weight of it. My wife had been gone 8 months. Cancer took her slow and mean, and I was so focused on my own pain that I didn't see Emma drowning in hers. She left a note, said she couldn't carry it anymore. The sadness, the loneliness, the feeling that nothing would ever be good again." Ellie sat down across from him, listening. "For years," Jonas continued, "I blamed myself. Told myself if I just looked at her, really looked at her, I would have seen, would have gotten her help, would have told her that pain doesn't last forever, even when it feels like it will." He met Ellie's eyes. "Your father didn't die because Sam wasn't strong enough. He died because evil exists in this world, and sometimes it wins. That's not Sam's fault. It's not your fault. It just is." "How do you live with it?" Ellie asked. "The knowing that you could have done something different?" "You make different choices going forward," Jonas said. "You take the pain and the guilt, and you use them to make sure you don't make the same mistakes twice. That's all any of us can do." They sat in silence for a while, two people bound by grief and determination. Then Ellie spoke again, her voice small. "What if we don't win? What if Cole comes and—" "Then we'll have fought," Jonas said firmly, "and that matters. The fighting matters, even if we lose." But Jonas didn't plan on losing. He'd already lost too much in his life. He wasn't about to lose this too. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sam woke briefly, his fever finally broken, his eyes clear for the first time in days. He looked at Jonas and whispered, "Thank you." Jonas just nodded and told him to rest, that he was safe now. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but he told it anyway because that's what you did for children. You gave them hope, even when you had none yourself. Around noon, Jonas was checking the perimeter when he saw dust on the horizon. Not the dust of a single rider, but the cloud that came with multiple horses moving fast. His stomach tightened. "Ellie!" he called. "Get Sam to the root cellar, now!" Ellie appeared at the door, saw his face, and understood immediately. She disappeared back inside, and Jonas heard her moving quickly through the house. He'd shown her the root cellar yesterday, a small underground space accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. It was cramped and dark, but it was hidden. If things went bad, if Jonas fell, the children would have a chance to stay hidden until help arrived. Jonas positioned himself on the porch with the Winchester, watching as the dust cloud grew closer. 5 riders, moving at a steady pace. Not rushing, because rushing showed fear, and these men wanted him to know they weren't afraid. They came to a stop 30 yards from the house, and Jonas felt his breath catch. The man in front wore a deputy's badge that caught the sunlight. Cole. He was younger than Jonas expected, maybe 30, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. The men flanking him looked exactly like what they were, hired guns with no loyalty beyond their paycheck. "Jonas Mercer?" Cole called out, his voice friendly, conversational. "Mind if we have a word?" "Say your piece from there," Jonas replied, the Winchester steady in his hands. Cole smiled. Fair enough. We're looking for 2 children, a girl and a boy, about 16 and 12. We have reason to believe they passed through this area recently. Haven't seen them, Jonas said flatly. Cole's smile widened. Now, Mr. Mercer, I know that's not true. My man saw tracks leading here 2 days ago, tracks that matched the horse these children stole. Your man was mistaken. Was he? Cole dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. See, here's the thing. These children are dangerous. Their uncle, their legal guardian, has been worried sick about them. There was an incident at their home. Their father died, and the children ran. Marcus Reeves just wants them back safe. Jonas felt rage building in his chest. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment he understood how Reeves had gotten away with it, how a corrupt sheriff might believe this story about troubled children and a concerned uncle. If that's true, Jonas said slowly, then why do you need 5 armed men to collect 2 scared kids? Cole's smile faded. Mr. Mercer, you seem like a reasonable man. I'd hate for this to get ugly. Just tell me where they are, and we'll be on our way. And if I can't tell you what I don't know, Cole sighed, like Jonas was being deliberately difficult. Then I'll have to search your property. And if I find out you've been hiding them, well, that's obstruction of justice. That's a serious crime. Justice, Jonas repeated, and he couldn't keep the contempt out of his voice. You stand there wearing a badge you didn't earn, working for a murderer, and you talk to me about justice? The air changed. Cole's friendly mask slipped, and Jonas saw the killer underneath. Last chance, old man, Cole said softly. Where are they? Jonas raised the Winchester, sighting down the barrel at Cole's chest. Off my property, now. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Cole laughed, a cold, empty sound that held no humor. Your choice, he said, remounting his horse. Boys, remember this house. Remember this man. We'll be back tonight, and when we come, we're not asking permission. They rode away slowly, taking their time, making sure Jonas understood they weren't afraid. When they disappeared over the ridge, Jonas lowered the rifle and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. From behind him, Ellie's voice came quiet and scared. They're really coming back, aren't they? Jonas turned to see her standing in the doorway, Sam leaning against her for support. The boy was pale but conscious, his eyes wide with understanding. Yes, Jonas said. There was no point in lying. They'll come after dark, probably try to burn us out or rush the house. Then we should run, Sam said, his voice weak but determined. While there's still time. Jonas looked at the boy, 12 years old, wounded, barely able to stand, and felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. No more running, Jonas said. We make our stand here. And that's exactly what they did. Jonas sent Ellie to ride to Jacob Miller's place with a message. Tonight, trouble comes. Send help if you can. If not, remember what happened here. Ellie rode out on Jonas's best horse, moving fast, and returned an hour later with Jacob's promise. Help was coming. Not in time to stop the attack, but in time to catch Cole and his men afterward. It was enough. It had to be enough. As the sun sank toward the horizon, Jonas, Ellie, and Sam prepared for war. They positioned rifles at every window, kept ammunition close, filled every container they could find with water in case of fire. Sam insisted on helping despite his wound, loading weapons with shaking hands while Ellie kept watch. I'm scared, Sam admitted as darkness fell. So am I, Jonas said honestly. Being scared doesn't make you a coward. It makes you smart. But being scared and fighting anyway, that's what makes you brave. Full darkness came, and with it, the waiting. Jonas kept the lamps low, just enough light to see by. They took positions, Jonas at the front window, Ellie at the side, Sam in the kitchen where he could reload weapons and stay relatively safe. The attack came just after midnight. Not with a rush of horses and gunfire, but with silence. Jonas saw them moving through the darkness like shadows. 6 men now, not 5. They'd picked up reinforcements. They spread out around the house, surrounding it, cutting off escape routes. Then Cole's voice rang out across the yard. Mercer, send out the children, and you live. Keep them, and we burn you all. Jonas didn't answer. Instead, he sighted carefully and fired.
The shot boomed through the night, and one of Cole's men cried out, clutching his leg. The response was immediate. Gunfire erupted from all sides, bullets punching through walls, shattering windows. Jonas dropped below the sill and returned fire, while Ellie did the same from her position. The house filled with smoke and noise, and through it all, Jonas heard Sam crying but still loading weapons, still doing his part. A torch arced through the darkness and landed on the porch. Flames spread quickly across the dry wood. Another torch hit the barn, and Jonas felt despair claw at him. They were going to burn them out, just like he'd feared. But Jonas Mercer hadn't survived 53 years in the West by giving up. He grabbed a bucket of water and threw open the door, dousing the flames on the porch while bullets whined past his head. He dove back inside, and Ellie was suddenly beside him, her face fierce. "The barn?" she asked. "Let it burn," Jonas said grimly. "We save ourselves first." The battle raged. Jonas lost track of time, lost track of how many shots he'd fired or how many men were still out there. He just kept fighting, kept moving, kept protecting the children who'd trusted him with their lives. Then, through the smoke and chaos, Jonas heard something that made his heart leap. More gunfire, but from a different direction. Shouts of confusion from Cole's men. And through the darkness came riders, 4 of them, led by Jacob Miller, rifles blazing. The tide turned. Caught between Jonas's house and Jacob's reinforcements, Cole's men broke. 2 were already down, wounded or dead. The others scattered, riding hard into the darkness. Only Cole remained, and Jonas saw him standing in the yard, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," Cole screamed. "You hear me, Mercer? This isn't over." Then he too was gone, swallowed by the night. Jonas sagged against the wall, his ears ringing, his hands shaking. Ellie was crying, and Sam was calling for her. Jacob Miller appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "They're gone," Jacob said. "For now." Jonas nodded, unable to speak. The barn was a total loss, flames consuming it, but the house still stood, and inside it, 2 children still breathed. It was enough. For now, it was enough. But Jonas knew Cole's words were true. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The barn burned through the night, flames reaching toward the stars like accusing fingers. Jonas stood in the yard with Jacob and 3 other ranchers, men he'd known for years but never really let close, and watched everything he'd built with Sarah turn to ash. The horses were safe, let out before the fire spread too far, but the structure itself was beyond saving. By dawn, nothing remained but charred timber and the acrid smell of smoke that would linger for weeks. Jacob clapped a hand on Jonas's shoulder. "We'll help you rebuild," he said, "soon as this business with Reeves is settled." Jonas nodded his thanks but couldn't find words. His throat was tight with exhaustion and something else, a feeling he hadn't experienced in 6 years. Purpose. For so long he'd existed rather than lived, going through motions without meaning. But last night, standing between those children and the men who would kill them, he'd felt alive again. Terrified, yes, but alive. Inside the house, Ellie had finally gotten Sam back to bed. The boy's wound had reopened during the chaos, blood seeping through the bandages, but Jonas had stitched it again while Sam bit down on a leather strap and Ellie held his hand. The kid was tough, tougher than any 12-year-old should have to be. "They'll come back," Jacob said, watching the dying embers. "Cole's the type who doesn't forget an insult, and you made him look weak in front of his men." "I know," Jonas said quietly. "That's why we need to end this. Not just survive it, end it." Jacob turned to look at him, eyes shrewd in the early morning light. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" "Marcus Reeves," Jonas said. "This all traces back to him. Cut off the head, and maybe the snake dies. Or maybe it just gets meaner," Jacob countered. "Man like Reeves doesn't get where he is without protection. Territorial officials, corrupt sheriffs, judges in his pocket. You go after him directly, you'll have more than 6 hired guns to worry about." Jonas knew Jacob was right, but he also knew that running, hiding, defending, none of it would keep Ellie and Sam safe in the long term. Reeves wanted them dead, wanted those papers buried, and he had the resources to hunt them across 3 territories. The only way to truly protect the children was to take away Reeves's reason for hunting them. "The papers," Jonas said suddenly. "The ones Ellie mentioned.
If we can get them to someone who matters, someone Reeves doesn't own, that's a big if, Jacob interrupted. Who you going to trust? Local sheriff's either corrupt or scared. Territorial marshal's office is 2 weeks' ride, and you really think those kids will survive 2 weeks on the road? Jonas rubbed his face, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Jacob was right on every count, but there had to be a way. There had to be. The other ranchers left as the sun climbed higher, promising to keep watch and spread word through the valley. If Cole returned with more men, Jonas wouldn't face them alone. It was something, at least. A fragile alliance built on the unspoken code of the West. You protected your own, and anyone under a neighbor's roof counted as their own. Jonas walked back to the house feeling every one of his 53 years. His side ached where he'd wrenched it diving for cover. His hands were blistered from handling hot weapons all night. But when he stepped into the kitchen and saw Ellie making coffee with practiced efficiency, saw Sam dozing in a chair with color finally returning to his face, he felt something shift in his chest. "You should sleep," Ellie said without turning around. "We'll keep watch." "In a bit," Jonas replied, sinking into his usual chair. The Winchester was still on the table where he'd left it, and he pulled it close out of habit. "We need to talk about what comes next." Ellie poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. In the morning light, she looked older than 16, or maybe just more tired. The innocence that should have been hers had been stripped away by violence and loss, leaving behind someone who'd seen too much too soon. "Cole will come back," she said flatly, "probably with more men. We can't stay here." "Running won't solve anything," Jonas said. "Your uncle has resources. He'll find you eventually, and next time you might not have a barn to hide in or neighbors to call on." "Then what do you suggest?" Ellie's voice held an edge of frustration. "We can't fight an army. We can't go to the law. We can't—" She stopped, her jaw working as she fought for control. Jonas reached across the table and took her hand. She flinched at first, then let him hold it. Her fingers were calloused and rough, the hands of someone who'd worked hard all her life. "The papers you mentioned," Jonas said gently. "The proof your father kept. Where are they now?" Ellie pulled her hand back and stood, moving to the window. For a long moment, she just stared out at the ruined barn. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "In my saddlebag. I sewed them into the lining the night we ran. I figured if anything happened to me, at least Sam wouldn't be caught with them." "And your father, did he tell anyone else about them? Anyone who might corroborate your story?" Ellie shook her head. "He was afraid. Said if word got out before he could get to the territorial capital, Reeves would move against us. He was right." Her voice cracked. "He was trying to protect us, and it got him killed." Jonas stood and joined her at the window. Outside, the morning was beautiful. Clear sky, birds singing, the land stretching toward distant mountains. It was the kind of morning Sarah had loved, the kind of morning that made you believe in second chances. "What if we made the papers public?" Jonas asked. Not to some official Reeves might own, but to everyone. Newspapers, town councils, every rancher and settler between here and the territorial capital. Make it so widely known that Reeves can't bury it. Ellie turned to look at him, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. "How? We can't exactly ride from town to town with Cole hunting us." "No," Jonas agreed. "But we know people. Jacob and the others, they have connections. And there's a newspaper man in Silver Creek, fellow named Anderson. He's ornery and independent, doesn't take bribes from anyone. If we can get him the story, get him the papers, he'll print it." "Silver Creek is 40 miles from here," Ellie said. "And it's where Cole claimed to be a deputy, remember? That's Reeves's territory." Jonas smiled grimly. "Which is exactly why Anderson will love this story. Nothing makes a good newspaper man happier than exposing corruption in his own backyard." Sam's voice came weakly from behind them. "Are we really going to fight back? Stop running?" Jonas and Ellie turned to find the boy sitting up, his face pale but determined. He'd been listening, and Jonas felt a surge of respect for this kid who refused to give up despite everything. "We're going to fight smart," Jonas said. "Your sister's right. We can't win a straight battle against Reeves's men, but we can win the war by making sure everyone knows the truth." "And then what?" Sam asked. "Even if people know, Even if they believe us, Reeves is rich. He's powerful. What's to stop him from just killing us anyway? It was a fair question, one Jonas had been wrestling with himself. The truth was, exposing Reeves wouldn't make him harmless. If anything, it might make him more dangerous, more desperate. A cornered animal was always the most vicious. We make ourselves too visible to kill quietly, Jonas said. Once the story's out, once people are watching, Reeves can't just make you disappear. It would confirm everything you've accused him of.
Unless he kills us before the story gets out, Ellie said quietly. Jonas met her eyes. That's the risk. I won't lie to you. This could go wrong in a dozen different ways, but doing nothing is just slow death. At least this way, we're fighting. Ellie looked at Sam, and some silent communication passed between them. Then Sam nodded, just once, and Ellie turned back to Jonas. Okay, she said. We do it your way. How do we start? Jonas had been thinking about this all morning, turning possibilities over in his mind. First, we get those papers somewhere safe. Not in your saddlebag, not anywhere Cole might think to look. I know a place, a hollow tree about 3 miles north. Sarah and I used to hide things there when Emma was little, playing treasure hunt games. His voice caught on the memory, but he pushed through. We'll put the originals there, make copies to carry. That way, if something happens to us, the evidence survives. And then? Ellie asked. Then we get word to Anderson, but not directly, too risky. Jacob knows a freighter who runs goods between here and Silver Creek. We can send a message through him, arrange a meeting somewhere neutral. While Cole's out there hunting us, Sam said. While we're hunting him, Jonas corrected. Right now, Cole thinks he has all the advantages. He thinks we're trapped here, scared, waiting for him to come back and finish the job. What if we surprise him? What if instead of defending, we attack? Ellie's eyes widened. Attack how? Jonas pulled out a worn map of the territory and spread it on the table. Cole's operating out of Silver Creek, probably using a house or hotel as base. He needs supplies, fresh horses, information. If we can figure out where he's staying, we could hit him there, not to kill necessarily, but to send a message. Let him know he's not the only one who can wage war. That's insane, Ellie said, but there was something in her voice that wasn't quite disagreement. We're 3 people, one of them wounded. Cole has at least 4 men left, maybe more if Reeves sends reinforcements. 3.5 people, Sam interjected. I can shoot. No, Ellie said firmly. You can barely stand. I can sit and shoot, Sam argued. Same as in a fight. Maybe better because I won't fall over. Jonas held up a hand before the siblings could descend into argument. Nobody's shooting anybody yet. This is reconnaissance first. We need information, where Cole's staying, how many men he has, what his plans are. Once we know that, we can make real decisions. And how do we get that information? Ellie asked. Jonas thought about it. Silver Creek was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. If Cole and his men were there, people would have noticed. The question was finding someone willing to talk, someone who wasn't on Reeves's payroll. Emily Chen, Jonas said suddenly. She runs a boarding house in Silver Creek. Good woman, honest. Her husband was a friend of mine before he died. If Cole's in town, Emily will know about it, and she'll tell me if I ask. If you ask, Ellie repeated. You're planning to go into Silver Creek yourself, where Cole's waiting? He's not waiting for me, Jonas pointed out. He's waiting for you 2 to make a mistake, to run or panic. He won't expect me to walk straight into his territory. Because it's suicide, Ellie said flatly. It's necessary, Jonas countered. We need that information, and I'm the only one who can get it without raising suspicion. I'm just a rancher whose barn burned down, coming to town for supplies. Nothing suspicious about that. Ellie opened her mouth to argue, but Sam spoke first. He's right, Ellie. Someone has to go, and it can't be us. They're looking for us specifically. Jonas is just some guy who helped us. Some guy whose house they tried to burn down, Ellie shot back. You think Cole won't recognize him? Cole saw me in the dark shooting at him, Jonas said. He doesn't know what I look like up close. And even if he does, well, sometimes you have to take risks. The truth was, Jonas knew this plan was dangerous, probably foolish, but he also knew they couldn't win by playing defense forever. Henry Clayton had taught him that years ago,
when Jonas was young and thought caution was the same as wisdom. Sometimes you had to step into the fire to put it out. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Jonas made copies of the papers Ellie had been carrying, crude hand-drawn maps showing property boundaries, a ledger documenting payments Reeves had made to various officials, a letter from Ellie's father to the Territorial Land Office detailing his concerns. The evidence was damning, but only if it reached the right people. Jonas sealed the originals in an oilskin pouch and rode north to the hollow tree, Ellie insisting on coming with him despite his protests. They didn't speak much during the ride, both of them scanning the horizon for threats. When they reached the tree, an ancient cottonwood split by lightning years ago. Jonas climbed down and placed the pouch deep in the hollow, covering it with stones and bark. "Your wife really used to hide things here?" Ellie asked, watching from her horse. "Treasures," she called them, Jonas said, his voice soft. Little gifts for Emma. A smooth stone, a pretty feather, sometimes a piece of hard candy Sarah had saved from town. Emma would run here every day after her chores, sure that magic fairies had left her presents. "That's beautiful," Ellie said quietly. Jonas climbed back onto his horse. Sarah understood something I didn't back then. She understood that childhood should be magical for as long as possible, because the real world intrudes soon enough. I thought she was being silly, playing these games. Now I'd give anything to have one more silly afternoon with them. They rode back in silence, but it was a companionable silence now, the kind between people who'd shared hardship and understood each other's scars. That evening, Jonas prepared for his trip to Silver Creek. He shaved carefully, put on his better shirt, made himself look like a man coming to town for ordinary business. He packed supplies, money, ammunition, a small pistol hidden in his boot, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. "You could get killed," Ellie said bluntly as Jonas saddled his horse. "Could have gotten killed last night, too," Jonas replied. "Could get killed tomorrow when Cole comes back. Could slip in the barn and break my neck. Living means risking death, Ellie. That's just how it works." "But you're doing this for us," she said, and her voice was tight with guilt. "If something happens to you, then you take Sam and ride to Jacob Miller's place," Jonas interrupted. "You tell him everything, give him the location of those papers, and you let him finish this. But I'm not planning on dying today. I'm too stubborn for that." He meant it to be light, but Ellie didn't smile. She just stood there in the yard, her arms wrapped around herself, looking younger than her 16 years. "I never thanked you," she said. "Not properly, for everything, for believing us, for fighting for us, for—" "Don't," Jonas said gently. "You don't owe me thanks. This is what people should do, what neighbors should do. Help each other, protect each other. That's how we survive out here." "Most people don't," Ellie said. "Most people would have turned us away, or worse." Jonas thought about that. She was probably right. The West could be cruel, and kindness was often seen as weakness. But Jonas had learned the hard way that cruelty ate you from the inside out, while kindness, even when it cost you, left something worth keeping. "Take care of your brother," Jonas said, mounting his horse. "Jacob's keeping watch. You see anything suspicious, you fire 3 shots in quick succession. He'll come running." "Jonas!" Ellie called as he started to ride away. He turned back. "Come home, okay? Sam's not the only one who needs you now." Jonas felt something warm spread through his chest. It had been so long since anyone had needed him, since he'd been more than just a ghost haunting his own life. He nodded to Ellie and rode toward Silver Creek, toward danger, toward whatever fate had waiting for him. The ride took 4 hours, and Jonas used the time to think. His plan was simple. Too simple, probably, which meant it might actually work. He'd ride into Silver Creek like any rancher coming to town, stop at Emily Chen's boarding house for a meal, and ask casual questions. Where was Cole staying? How many men did he have? What were people saying about the burned barn and the rancher who'd harbored fugitives? Of course, if Cole happened to be at the boarding house, or if someone recognized Jonas and reported to Cole, the plan would fall apart fast. But Jonas had faced death before. He'd watched it take Sarah inch by painful inch, had found it waiting in Emma's eyes that terrible morning. After that, the prospect of a bullet seemed almost mundane. Silver Creek came into view as the sun began its descent toward evening. It was a typical frontier town, One main street with a handful of businesses, houses scattered on the outskirts, a church that doubled as a school on weekdays. Jonas had been here dozens of times over the years, knew most of the faces, understood the town's rhythms. But as he rode down the main street, he noticed something different. Men standing on corners, watching. Not obviously armed, but with the posture of people ready for trouble. Jonas recognized the type. Hired muscle, the kind that gravitated toward men like Reeves and Cole. The town was occupied, essentially, turned into a base of operations for hunting 2 children. Jonas felt anger rise in his throat, but pushed it down. Anger made you stupid, made you take risks you shouldn't. He needed to be smart now, careful. He tied his horse outside Emily Chen's boarding house and walked inside, moving with the unhurried gait of a man who had nothing to hide. Emily was behind the counter, her gray hair pulled back, her face lined with the hard work of running a business alone. She looked up when Jonas entered, and her eyes widened briefly before she schooled her expression to neutrality. "Jonas Mercer," she said evenly. "It's been a while." "Emily," Jonas replied, tipping his hat, "hoped you might have a room available, and maybe some of that stew you're famous for." Emily glanced past him toward the street, then back. "I have a room, stew too. Come on back to the kitchen, and we'll talk price." Jonas followed her through the boarding house, noting the empty common room, the closed doors of guest rooms. Emily led him to her private kitchen and shut the door firmly before turning to face him. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "Coming here? Cole's got men watching every building in town. He's offering $100 to anyone who reports seeing you or those children." "I know," Jonas said calmly. "That's why I'm here. I need information, Emily. Where's Cole staying?" Emily crossed her arms. "You think I'm going to help you get yourself killed? Your wife was my friend, Jonas. Sarah would haunt me forever if I let you do something this stupid." "Sarah would understand," Jonas said quietly. "These are children, Emily. Orphans running from a murderer. What would Sarah want me to do, turn my back?" Emily's expression softened, but worry still lined her face. "Cole's staying at the Grand Hotel, top floor. He's got at least 6 men with him now, maybe more. They've taken over half the building, intimidating guests, asking questions. Marshall Peters is too scared to do anything about it. And Anderson, the newspaper man?" Emily's eyebrows rose. "You thinking of going to the press?" "Maybe. Is he still in town?" "For now, but he's keeping his head down. Reeves sent word that any newspaper printing inflammatory lies about him would face legal action. Anderson's brave, but he's also practical. He won't print something that'll get him killed." Jonas nodded slowly, processing this. The situation was worse than he'd thought. Reeves had essentially taken control of Silver Creek through fear and money, but that also meant there was anger simmering beneath the surface. People didn't like being pushed around, even when they were too scared to push back. "I need to see Anderson," Jonas said, quietly. "Can you get a message to him?" Emily studied him for a long moment. "You're really going to do this, fight Reeves?" "I don't have a choice," Jonas said. "Neither do those kids." Emily sighed deeply, then nodded. "Anderson takes his evening meal at the cafe on 3rd Street, sits in the back corner, always alone. You could accidentally run into him there." "Thank you, Emily." "Don't thank me," she said sharply. "Just stay alive. I've buried too many good people already." Jonas left through the back door of the boarding house, moving through alleys rather than main streets. Silver Creek wasn't large, but it had enough shadows to hide in if you knew where to look. He made his way toward 3rd Street, his hand never far from the pistol hidden under his coat. The cafe was busy with evening customers, and Jonas slipped in quietly, keeping his hat low. He spotted Anderson immediately, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the permanent squint of someone who spent too much time reading by lamplight. Jonas bought coffee and a plate of beans, then made his way to Anderson's corner. "This seat taken?" Jonas asked. Anderson looked up, irritation flashing across his face until he saw Jonas's expression. Something in Jonas's eyes must have communicated urgency, because Anderson's irritation shifted to curiosity. "Help yourself," Anderson said. Jonas sat, positioning himself so he could watch the door. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. Then Anderson spoke, his voice barely above a murmur. "You're the rancher, the one who took in the Reeves kids." "They're not Reeves kids," Jonas said quietly. "They're the children of a murdered man.
and I have proof. Anderson's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Proof. Documents, letters, ledgers showing bribes, everything you'd need to write the story of the decade, everything that would prove Marcus Reeves murdered his own brother for land. And get me killed, Anderson added dryly. Maybe, Jonas admitted.
Or maybe it saves your life. You think Reeves is going to leave you alone forever? Once he consolidates power here, every newspaperman in the territory becomes a potential threat. You can print what he wants you to print and become his mouthpiece, or you can fight. Anderson leaned back, studying Jonas with sharp eyes. Why should I trust you? For all I know, this is some scheme of Cole's to test my loyalty. Because in 2 days I'm going to send you copies of those documents, Jonas said. And when you see them, when you read what Reeves has done, you'll know I'm telling the truth. The question is whether you'll have the courage to print it. And if I do print it, what stops Reeves from burning down my office? Or worse? Nothing, Jonas said honestly, except public outrage, except decent people in this town who are sick of being bullied, except the chance to be remembered as the man who exposed corruption instead of the man who let it fester. Anderson was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Then he leaned forward. Send me the documents, he said. I'll look at them. If they're real, if they're as damning as you say, I'll consider it, but I'm not promising anything. Fair enough, Jonas said, standing. One more thing. Cole's got men watching the streets. Any idea how I get out of town without being spotted? Anderson smiled grimly. There's a ravine behind the livery stable. Follows the creek bed north for about 2 miles before it opens up onto the main road. Not pleasant riding, but it's hidden. Jonas nodded his thanks and left the cafe, moving quickly now. The sun was setting, shadows lengthening across Silver Creek, and Jonas needed to be gone before full dark brought Cole's men out in force. He made it to the livery stable without incident, retrieved his horse, and guided it down into the ravine Anderson had mentioned. The going was rough, rocky ground, overhanging branches that threatened to sweep him from the saddle, but Jonas kept moving, putting distance between himself and Silver Creek. He'd almost made it to the open road when he heard voices. Jonas pulled his horse to a stop, listening. 2 men, maybe 3, somewhere ahead in the darkness. Jonas dismounted quietly, leading his horse by the reins, moving as silently as he could through the underbrush. The voices grew clearer. 2 men, definitely, and Jonas recognized one of them. Cole's voice, sharp and angry. Don't care what excuses you have. Mercer's in town and I want him found. Check every building, every alley. Someone must have seen him. We've been looking, a second voice protested. He's like a ghost. Then try harder, Cole snapped. Reeves wants this finished. The kids, Mercer, anyone who knows about those papers, all of them gone before word spreads. Jonas's heart hammered in his chest. He was maybe 30 feet from where they stood, hidden by darkness and brush but completely trapped. If they decided to search the ravine, they'd find him, and at this range, with 2 of them and only one of him, his chances weren't good. He waited, barely breathing, his hand on the pistol at his belt. The conversation continued, Cole giving orders, the other man agreeing with obvious reluctance. Then, finally, the sound of boots on stone, moving away. Jonas remained frozen for another 5 minutes, making sure they were truly gone, before mounting his horse and continuing carefully toward the open road. When he finally emerged from the ravine onto familiar territory, Jonas allowed himself a moment of relief. He'd gotten the information he needed. Anderson would receive the documents, and if the newspaperman had even half the courage Jonas thought he did, the truth would come out. But as Jonas rode through the darkness toward home, Cole's words echoed in his mind, all of them gone before word spreads. The timeline had just shortened. Reeves wasn't playing a long game anymore. He wanted this over fast, which meant the attack would come soon. Very soon. Jonas pushed his horse harder, urgency thrumming through his veins. He needed to get back to Ellie and Sam, needed to warn them that the war was about to escalate. As he crested the ridge overlooking his ranch, Jonas saw lights burning in the windows. Ellie waiting up, keeping watch like he'd taught her. He was almost home when he saw the second set of lights, these ones moving. Torches, 3 of them, coming from the south. Riding hard toward his ranch, Jonas kicked his horse into a gallop, racing against whoever was coming, praying he'd reach Ellie and Sam before the riders did. The wind whipped past his face, carrying with it the smell of smoke and the promise of violence. The West had taught him that some fights were inevitable. You could run, you could hide, you could pray for mercy. But eventually, you had to stand and face what was coming. Jonas Mercer had spent 6 years running from his grief, hiding from life, praying for oblivion. He was done running now. Jonas's horse thundered across the hard-packed earth, foam flecking its mouth as he drove it harder than he should. The torches were closer now, close enough that he could make out 3 riders moving in formation toward his ranch. His mind raced through possibilities. Was this Cole's advance guard? Had Reeves sent reinforcements? Or was this something else entirely? He reached the yard 30 seconds before the riders, sliding from his horse and sprinting toward the house. Ellie met him at the door, rifle in hand, her face pale in the lamplight. "I saw them coming," she said quickly. "Sam's in the cellar. I was about to—" "Wait," Jonas said, holding up a hand. Something about the riders' approach wasn't right. They weren't trying to surround the house or spread out for an attack. They were riding straight up the main path, torches held high like a warning rather than a weapon. As Jonas watched from the window, the lead rider pulled up 50 yards from the house and called out, "Jonas Mercer, we're not here to fight." Jonas recognized the voice. Thomas Whitmore, a rancher from 10 miles west. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by confusion. He stepped onto the porch, rifle lowered but ready. "Tom, what the hell are you doing riding up on my place like the devil's on your heels?" The 3 riders approached slowly, and Jonas saw they were all ranchers he knew. Tom Whitmore, Paul Henderson, and young Danny Carson, who couldn't be more than 22. Their faces were grim, and Tom dismounted with the weariness of a man carrying bad news. "We came to warn you," Tom said without preamble. "Cole's gathering men. Word is he's planning to hit your place tomorrow at dawn with at least a dozen guns, maybe more." Jonas felt his stomach drop. "How do you know this?" "My boy was in Silver Creek today," Tom said. "Heard Cole recruiting. He's offering $50 a head to anyone willing to ride with him. Some are taking him up on it, drifters mostly, men who don't care what they're fighting for as long as the money's good." Paul Henderson stepped forward, a stocky man with graying hair and steady eyes. "It's worse than that, Jonas. Reeves himself is coming. He's bringing a wagon of supplies and enough ammunition for a siege. They're not planning to just chase those kids off. They're planning to make an example." Jonas's mind reeled. A dozen men, maybe more. Reeves personally involved. This had escalated beyond anything he'd imagined. He thought of Ellie and Sam hiding in his house, 2 children who'd already survived so much, and felt rage and fear war in his chest. "When?" Jonas asked quietly. "Dawn tomorrow," Danny Carson said, speaking for the first time. His voice shook slightly. "They're mustering at the old Brennan place. You know it, about 8 miles south. They'll ride from there at first light." But Jonas did know it. The Brennan place had been abandoned for years after the family moved east. It was perfect for staging an attack, close enough to strike quickly, far enough to avoid being spotted easily. "Why are you telling me this?" Jonas asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "You could stay out of it. Stay safe." Tom Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Because what Cole and Reeves are doing is wrong. We all know it. Those kids didn't kill anyone. Their father was murdered, and now Reeves wants to bury the evidence along with the witnesses. Some of us still believe in doing right, even when it's dangerous." "Jacob Miller sent word through the valley," Paul added, "called on every man who believes in justice to make a choice. Some chose to hide. We chose to ride." Jonas felt emotion tighten his throat. In the 6 years since Sarah and Emma died, he'd isolated himself from the community, convinced that connection only led to pain. But here were these men, risking their lives and their families' safety because they believed in something larger than themselves. "How many are with us?" Jonas asked. 7 so far, Tom said. "Jacob's spreading word to others, but some won't come. They're too scared of Reeves, or they don't want to risk their families. Can't blame them for that." 7 against 12 or more, Jonas said, doing the math. "Those aren't good odds." "They're better than 1 against 12, Paul pointed out. "And we're not just farmers and ranchers anymore, Jonas. We're men who've decided enough is enough. That counts for something." Jonas looked at these 3 men, neighbors he'd barely spoken to in years, and saw the same determination he felt burning in their eyes. They were right. This was bigger than him, bigger than Ellie and Sam. This was about whether decent people would stand against evil when it came calling, or whether they'd let fear turn them into cowards. "Thank you," Jonas said simply. "All of you, for coming, for caring." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll ride back and spread word about the timeline. Jacob's gathering everyone at his place before dawn. We'll make our stand there, better defensive position than here, and his ranch has more buildings to use for cover." "No," Jonas said firmly. "They're coming for me and the kids. Jacob doesn't need his home destroyed." "It's already decided," Tom said. "Jacob insisted. Said you've taken enough losses already." He gestured toward the burned barn still smoldering in the darkness. "Besides, his place has something yours doesn't, a root cellar with a hidden exit that leads to the creek bed. If things go bad, we can get the kids out that way." Jonas wanted to argue, but he could see the logic. And more than that, he could see that Jacob and the others had already committed. This was happening whether Jonas agreed or not. "All right," Jonas said finally. "We'll move to Jacob's before dawn, but I need to do something first. Those documents I mentioned to Anderson, I'm sending copies tonight. If we don't make it through tomorrow, someone needs to know the truth." After the three ranchers left, Jonas went inside and found Ellie standing in the kitchen, her face a mask of controlled terror. Sam had emerged from the cellar and sat at the table, his wound clearly paining him, but his eyes sharp and alert. "You heard?" Jonas asked. "Every word," Ellie said. "Jonas, you can't do this. None of you can. This is our fight, not yours." "It stopped being just your fight the moment Cole tried to burn down my barn," Jonas said. He moved to his writing desk and pulled out the copies he'd made of the documents. "But you're right that this is about more than fighting. It's about making sure the truth survives, even if we don't." He worked quickly, sealing the documents in an envelope addressed to Anderson at the Silver Creek newspaper. Then he wrote a second letter, this one to the territorial marshal's office, explaining everything. He sealed both letters and turned to Sam. "Can you ride?" Jonas asked. "I can manage," Sam said, sitting up straighter. "No," Ellie said immediately. "He's still healing. He can't—" "I need someone to take these to the freighter station at Miller's Crossing," Jonas interrupted gently. "It's only 6 miles, mostly flat ground. The freighter runs to Silver Creek and the territorial capital. These need to be on that wagon tomorrow morning before the attack comes." "I'll go," Ellie said. "No," Jonas said firmly. "Sam goes because if Cole gets past us tomorrow, you're the one who knows where the original documents are hidden. You're the backup plan. Sam's the messenger." Sam stood, wincing slightly, but keeping his face stoic. "I can do it. I want to do it. We've been running for so long, I want to do something that matters." Ellie looked between Jonas and her brother, and Jonas could see the struggle playing out on her face. She wanted to protect Sam, wanted to keep him close and safe, but she also understood that sometimes the only way to protect someone was to let them be brave. "If anything happens to you," Ellie started. "It won't," Sam said, putting his hand on her shoulder. "I'm just riding to Miller's Crossing and back. I'll be careful." Jonas gave Sam detailed directions and a fresh horse. Not as fast as some, but steady and reliable. He also gave him a pistol and made sure the boy knew how to use it. "If you see anyone on the road, anyone at all, you hide," Jonas instructed. "Don't take chances. Don't be a hero. Just get these letters to the freighter and come straight back to Jacob's place. Understand?" Sam nodded, pocketing the letters carefully. He hugged Ellie tightly, and Jonas saw her whisper something in his ear that made the boy nod solemnly. Then Sam mounted the horse and rode into the darkness, and Jonas felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. "If something happens to him because of this," Ellie said. "Then we'll deal with it," Jonas said quietly. "But Sam's tougher than you think. He'll make it." They spent the next hour packing essentials, ammunition, food, water, medical supplies. Jonas took one last walk through his house, looking at all the things Sarah had chosen, all the memories embedded in every corner. Emma's room, still preserved like a shrine, the kitchen where they'd shared so many meals, the bedroom where Sarah had died, where Jonas had held her hand and promised her he'd take care of Emma, a promise he'd failed to keep. "You ready?" Ellie asked from the doorway. Jonas nodded, though ready was probably the wrong word. He was committed, he was determined, but ready implied confidence in the outcome, and Jonas had learned long ago that the West didn't care about confidence. It only cared about what you were willing to sacrifice. They rode through the pre-dawn darkness to Jacob Miller's ranch, arriving to find it transformed into a fortress. 7 men moved through the yard with purpose, boarding windows, positioning water barrels, creating firing positions. Jacob met them at the door, his weathered face set in grim determination. "Sam get off all right?" Jacob asked. "Few hours ago," Jonas confirmed. "Should be at Miller's Crossing by now." "Good," Jacob said. "Come inside. We need to plan this." The interior of Jacob's house was crowded with men Jonas had known for years but never really connected with. Tom Whitmore and Paul Henderson he'd met earlier. But there was also Miguel Ortega, a tough vaquero who ran a small spread to the east. Frank Jessup, a former army sergeant with scars that told stories he never spoke about. Robert Chen, Emily's son, who'd ridden from Silver Creek to join the fight. And young Danny Carson, barely more than a boy, but with a rifle held steady and eyes that had already seen too much. 8 of us, Jacob said, laying out a hand-drawn map of his property on the table. Against 12 or more. But we have advantages. We know the ground. We're defending, not attacking. And we're fighting for something that matters. Question is, what's their plan? Frank Jessup said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a man used to command. They could try to burn us out like they did Jonas's barn. Could try to starve us out with a siege. Could just rush the house with superior numbers. Cole's not patient, Jonas said, thinking of what he'd overheard in Silver Creek. And Reeves wants this over fast. They'll try something aggressive, probably hit us from multiple sides, try to overwhelm our defenses through sheer firepower. Then we need to make every shot count, Miguel said, checking his rifle with practiced efficiency. No wasting ammunition, no panic firing. We pick targets, we shoot smart. Jacob pointed to the map. House is the main defensive position, but we've got the barn here, the smokehouse here, and the old bunkhouse here. If we put men in each building, we can create crossfire that'll make it hell for anyone trying to approach. That splits our forces, Robert Chen pointed out. If they concentrate on one building, we use the tunnels, Jacob interrupted. I've got crawl spaces connecting the main buildings. Dug them during the Indian troubles 20 years back. If one position gets overrun, we can fall back without exposing ourselves in the open. Jonas studied the map, impressed despite the circumstances. Jacob had been preparing for this kind of fight for decades, even if he'd never expected to actually need it. "Where do you want me?" Jonas asked. "Main house, front window," Jacob said. "You're the best shot here. Miguel and Tom will be with you. Frank, you take the barn with Paul. Robert and Danny, you're in the smokehouse. I'll be in the bunkhouse with supplies and a clear view of the approach." "And me?" Ellie asked, her voice cutting through the men's planning. The room fell silent. Jonas could feel the discomfort radiating from the others. None of them wanted to say it, that she was a 16-year-old girl, that she shouldn't be part of this fight, that she should hide in the cellar with the other women and children. "You're on ammunition duty," Jacob said finally. "Moving between positions, keeping everyone supplied. It's dangerous work, but it's vital. We can't hold them off if we run out of bullets." Ellie's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Jonas could see she wanted to argue, wanted to demand a rifle and a position like the men. But she was also practical enough to understand that Jacob's assignment was actually crucial. Someone had to coordinate, to make sure no position got isolated. They spent the remaining hours before dawn finalizing positions and running through scenarios. Jonas found himself impressed by how quickly this group of ranchers and cowboys had become a functioning military unit. Frank's army training helped, but there was more to it than that. These were men who'd spent their lives dealing with harsh conditions and long odds. They knew how to adapt, how to survive. As the eastern sky began to lighten from black to deep blue, Jacob called them together one final time. "I won't lie to you," he said quietly. "Some of us probably won't see sunset tonight. Cole and Reeves have numbers and money on their side. But we have something they don't. We're fighting for what's right. Not for profit, not for land, but because we couldn't live with ourselves if we stood by and let them kill children." "Hell of a speech," Tom Whitmore said with a grim smile. Let's make sure we survive to tell people about it." The men dispersed to their positions, moving with the kind of calm that came from accepting whatever fate had in store. Jonas settled into his spot at the front window, checking his Winchester one final time. Miguel took the window to his left, Tom the one to his right. The sky continued to lighten, stars fading one by one. "You ever think your life would come to this?" Miguel asked quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Making a stand like this?" Jonas thought about it. "No," he said honestly. 6 months ago, I was just waiting to die. Didn't much care when it happened. Now I find myself fighting like hell to stay alive." "Funny how that works," Miguel said. "Few years back, I was ready to give up too. Lost my wife to fever, lost my son to a rattlesnake bite. Thought there wasn't any point continuing. Then one day I woke up and realized the best way to honor them was to keep living, keep fighting, keep choosing to care." Jonas nodded, understanding completely. That's what Ellie and Sam had given him. A reason to care again, a reason to fight. Whatever happened today, at least he wouldn't die alone in his grief. He'd die trying to protect something precious. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful morning, Jonas thought. Sarah would have loved it. He imagined her standing beside him, her hand on his shoulder, telling him he was doing the right thing, telling him Emma would be proud. "Movement," Tom said sharply, and Jonas's attention snapped back to the present. There, on the ridgeline about half a mile out, riders appeared. Jonas counted quickly. 9, 10, 12. More than they'd expected. The riders stopped, silhouettes against the rising sun, and Jonas could imagine them studying Jacob's ranch, planning their approach. Then they started forward at a steady trot, and Jonas felt his heartbeat accelerate. This was it. No more planning, no more preparation. Just survival and bullets, and the thin line between living and dying. "Hold fire!" Jonas called out, his voice carrying to the other buildings. "Let them get close. Make every shot matter." The riders spread out as they approached, forming a line that would hit multiple buildings simultaneously. Smart tactics, Jonas noted, probably Frank or someone with military training advising them. When they were about 200 yards out, Jonas finally saw Cole clearly, riding in the center, his deputy's badge glinting in the morning sun, that same cold smile on his face. And beside Cole, on a horse that probably cost more than most men made in a year, sat Marcus Reeves himself. Jonas had never seen the man in person, but there was no mistaking him. Expensive suit, perfectly groomed despite the hard riding, an air of entitlement that radiated even at this distance. "That's Reeves," Jonas said quietly, "the one beside Cole." "Good," Miguel muttered. "Be ashamed to fight this battle without shooting the head snake." At 100 yards, Cole raised his hand and the riders stopped. For a long moment, silence stretched across the space between the two groups. Then Cole's voice rang out, clear and mocking. "Jacob Miller, Jonas Mercer, you're harboring fugitives and obstructing justice. Send out the Reeves children, and the rest of you walk away free. This is your last chance." Jonas exchanged glances with Miguel and Tom. They all knew it was a lie. Cole wouldn't leave witnesses, and Reeves couldn't afford to let any of them survive. This was about annihilation, pure and simple. "What do you think?" Tom asked. "We answer him?" Jonas thought about it, then cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted back, "Come and take them, you murdering coward!" The effect was immediate. Jonas saw Cole stiffen in his saddle, saw Reeves lean over and say something sharp. Then Cole drew his pistol and fired a single shot into the air, the signal to attack. The riders charged, and the world exploded into noise and smoke. Jonas fired, working the Winchester's lever action with practiced speed. One rider tumbled from his saddle. Miguel took down another. From the barn, Frank's rifle boomed, heavy caliber, probably his old Army Springfield, and a third man fell. But there were too many. They reached the buildings, some dismounting to take cover, others circling to flank. Bullets punched through walls, shattered windows. Jonas dropped below the sill, glass raining down on him, and came up shooting. A man with a torch raised his arm to throw, and Jonas's shot took him in the chest. The torch fell, setting grass on fire, but away from any structures. "They're trying to burn the barn!" Tom shouted, and Jonas swung his rifle to see two men with torches approaching from the blind side. He fired, hit one, But the second man threw his torch onto the barn roof before Miguel's shot dropped him. Flames began to spread across the old wood shingles. "Frank! Paul! Get out of there!" Jonas yelled, but he couldn't tell if they heard over the gunfire. From the smokehouse, Robert and Danny were holding their position, their rifles creating a deadly crossfire. But Jonas could see Cole directing men to concentrate fire on that building, trying to suppress them. 3 riders dismounted and began moving in an organized rush toward the smokehouse door. "Cover them!" Jonas shouted, but even as he fired, he knew they couldn't get all 3. Robert appeared at the smokehouse window, his rifle barking twice, and 2 of the rushers fell. But the third crashed through the door, and Jonas heard the flat crack of close-quarters gunfire, screams, chaos. "Robert!" Jonas started to move toward the door, but Miguel grabbed his arm. "You go out there. You're dead. Let them handle it. Them." Miguel was right, but it felt like cowardice to stay put while others fought and died. Then Jonas saw Robert stagger out of the smokehouse, blood streaming from his shoulder, and collapse in the yard. The man who'd shot him appeared in the doorway, raising his rifle to finish the job. Jonas didn't think. He just shot. The bullet took the man in the throat, and he fell backward into the smokehouse. But Robert was down and exposed, and Jonas could see at least 2 more riders swinging their weapons toward the wounded man. Ellie broke from the main house, running low and fast, reaching Robert and dragging him toward cover with strength Jonas wouldn't have believed she possessed. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet, but she didn't stop, didn't slow. She got Robert behind a water trough and immediately began returning fire with his rifle. "That girl's got sand," Tom said with something like awe in his voice. The barn's roof was fully ablaze now, flames reaching toward the sky. Jonas saw Frank and Paul emerge from the crawlspace tunnel, coughing from smoke but alive. They took up positions behind the bunkhouse, continuing to fire. But the building was lost, and with it, one of their defensive positions. Jonas reloaded, his hands moving automatically while his mind raced. They'd taken down 5 of Cole's men, but that still left 7 plus Cole and Reeves, and now they were down to 3 buildings, with 1 man wounded and ammunition running low. A movement caught Jonas's eye, Cole and 3 men moving toward the main house, using the smoke from the barn as cover. Jonas aimed carefully and fired. The shot went wide as Cole dove behind a wagon. Jonas fired again, splintering wood, but Cole was already moving, too fast, too smart. Then Jonas saw what Cole was doing. He wasn't trying to attack the house. He was trying to reach the root cellar entrance, the hidden exit Jacob had mentioned. If Cole got to that, he could come up inside the house, behind their defenses. "Miguel, Tom, Cole's going for the cellar!" Jonas abandoned his window and ran through the house, Miguel right behind him. They reached the kitchen just as the cellar door began to open from below. Jonas didn't hesitate. He fired 3 shots down through the wooden door, heard a scream, heard the door slam shut. But they'd revealed their position. Bullets crashed through the kitchen windows, forcing Jonas and Miguel to drop flat. Tom appeared from the other room, his rifle empty, and Jonas tossed him a loaded pistol. "We're being surrounded," Jacob's voice echoed from somewhere. "Fall back to the main house." Jonas crawled to the window and risked a look. Frank, Paul, and Jacob were making a fighting retreat from the bunkhouse, which was now taking concentrated fire. Young Danny Carson appeared from the smokehouse, dragging something. Ammunition boxes, Jonas realized. The kid was risking his life to resupply them. "Cover them," Jonas shouted, and every gun in the main house opened up, laying down suppressing fire. Frank and the others made it to the house, crashing through the door bloody but alive. Danny made it too, though he'd taken a bullet through his leg and was trailing blood. They were all in the main house now, 8 defenders packed into Jacob's home, surrounded by enemies, with ammunition running low and no reinforcements coming. Jonas did a quick count. Jacob had been grazed across his ribs, bleeding but functional. Robert had a shoulder wound that needed attention. Danny's leg wound was worse than he was letting on. Everyone else was whole but exhausted. "How many bullets left?" Jonas asked. The answers came back grim. Most had fewer than 20 rounds. Some had less than 10. They might last another 30 minutes if they were careful. Not nearly long enough. "The tunnel," Jacob said suddenly. "The hidden exit. We can get the kids out that way. Send them to safety while we hold here." "Where's Sam?" Ellie asked, and Jonas heard the panic in her voice. Everyone looked around. They'd been so focused on the fight that nobody had noticed the boy's absence. Jonas felt his stomach drop. Sam should have been back hours ago from Miller's Crossing. Maybe he stayed there, Miguel offered. Safer than riding back into this. But Jonas saw the fear in Ellie's eyes and knew she was thinking the same thing he was. What if Cole had men watching the roads? What if Sam had been caught? Before anyone could respond, Cole's voice rang out again. "You're beaten. Throw down your weapons and send out the girl. Do that, and maybe the rest of you live." "He's lying," Frank said flatly. "Moment we give up, he kills us all." "I know," Jonas said. He moved to the front window carefully and looked out. Cole stood in the open now, confident, his gun holstered. Behind him, Reeves sat on his horse, watching the house with the cold calculation of a man watching a business transaction. And then Jonas saw something that made his blood freeze. Two of Cole's men were dragging someone forward, a small figure struggling against their grip. Sam. The boy's face was bruised, his shirt torn, but he was alive. Barely. "Sam!" Ellie screamed, and Jonas had to grab her to keep her from running out the door. "Let me go!" Ellie fought against Jonas's grip, wild with desperation. "They have Sam! They'll kill him!" "They'll kill you both," Jonas said, holding her firm despite her struggles. "That's what they want, for you to give yourself up out of fear. We need to think, Ellie. We need to be smart." Cole's voice carried across the yard again. "You've got 1 minute to decide. The girl or the boy dies. Your choice." Jonas felt Ellie go still in his arms, and when he looked at her face, he saw something that terrified him: resignation. She'd already made her decision. "No," Jonas said firmly. "You're not sacrificing yourself." "He's my brother," Ellie said, her voice dead calm now. "I won't let him die because of me." "And I won't let you die because of them," Jonas shot back. He looked around at the other men, saw the same determination in their faces. They hadn't come this far, fought this hard, to give up now. "There has to be another way," Jacob said. "Some play we haven't seen yet." Jonas's mind raced. They were out of time, out of ammunition, out of options. Cole had Sam. Reeves had the power. Everything Jonas had tried to build, this fragile alliance, this desperate stand, was crumbling. And then he heard it. Distant at first, but growing louder. The sound of horses. A lot of horses. Coming fast from the north. Everyone froze, listening. Cole heard it too. Jonas could see confusion cross his face. Reeves turned in his saddle, looking toward the sound. And for the first time, the man's expression showed something other than cold confidence. He looked worried. Over the ridge poured riders, not 3 or 5, but dozens. Ranchers, cowboys, townspeople, all armed and riding hard toward Jacob's ranch. At their head rode a man Jonas recognized even at this distance, Marshal William Hayes, territorial marshal, with his badge glinting in the morning sun and a rifle across his saddle. The marshal's voice boomed across the valley. "Cole! Reeves! You're under arrest for murder, attempted murder, and about a dozen other charges. Drop your weapons and surrender." For a moment, everything stopped. Cole stood frozen, still holding Sam. Reeves sat on his horse, calculations running behind his eyes. The remaining hired guns looked at each other, clearly wondering if their pay was worth dying for. Then Cole moved, yanking Sam in front of him as a shield, his pistol pressed to the boy's head. "You come any closer and the kid dies!" The marshal pulled up his horse 50 yards out, his men fanning out behind him. Jonas counted at least 30 riders, and his heart swelled with desperate hope. But that hope was tempered by the sight of Cole's gun against Sam's temple. "Looks like we have a standoff," the marshal said calmly. "But here's the thing, Cole. I've got 30 armed men, and you've got what, 5 left? Plus you're holding a 12-year-old hostage, which tends to make juries extra unfriendly. You kill that boy, and there's nowhere in the territory you can hide." "I'll take my chances," Cole snarled, but Jonas could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to win. Jonas made his decision. He moved to the door, ignoring Ellie's protests, and stepped out onto the porch with his hands visible and empty. "Cole," Jonas called. "You want the girl?" "She's here. Let the boy go. Take her instead. She's what Reeves wanted anyway." "Jonas, no!"
Ellie screamed from inside, but Jonas kept his eyes on Cole, watching the calculation happening behind the man's eyes. A trade. The prize for the hostage. It made sense from Cole's perspective, and it bought them time. "Walk her out," Cole demanded. "Slow! Any tricks and I shoot the kid." Jonas turned and saw Ellie in the doorway, her face a mask of fury and terror. "Trust me," Jonas mouthed to her, then louder. "Come on, Ellie. It'll be all right." Ellie stepped out, and Jonas saw her hand brush against her boot. She'd tucked a knife there. He'd taught her that first night, a last resort. Good girl, Jonas thought. Smart girl. They walked forward together, Jonas slightly ahead, moving toward Cole and Sam. The marshal's men watched with weapons ready but held their fire. One wrong move and this would turn into a bloodbath. 20 feet from Cole. 15. Jonas could see Sam's face now, see the tears streaming down the boy's cheeks, the terror in his eyes. 10 feet. "That's far enough," Cole said. "Girl, you come the rest of the way. Mercer, you stay put." Ellie started forward, and Jonas felt time slow down. This was the moment. Everything balanced on this razor's edge. He watched Ellie's hand, watched Cole's trigger finger, watched Sam's eyes. And then Sam did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. He stomped down hard on Cole's instep and threw his head backward, smashing into Cole's nose. Cole's grip loosened for just a second, and Sam twisted away. Jonas moved. After 6 years of grief-induced lethargy, after decades of careful, measured decisions, Jonas Mercer moved like a man 20 years younger. He covered the distance in 3 long strides, reaching Cole just as the man was raising his pistol toward Sam's fleeing back. Jonas hit Cole like a freight train, driving him to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, fighting for the gun. Cole was younger, faster, but Jonas had rage fueling him. Rage for Sarah, for Emma, for every innocent person who'd ever been victimized by men like this. He drove his fist into Cole's face once, twice, and felt the man's nose break beneath his knuckles. The gun went off. Jonas felt something hot tear through his side, but couldn't stop to assess it. He grabbed Cole's gun hand and slammed it against the ground until the weapon fell free. Then Ellie was there, pressing her knife against Cole's throat. "Don't move," she said, and her voice held the cold certainty of someone who'd do exactly what she promised. Around them, the marshal's men had disarmed the remaining hired guns. Only Reeves remained on his horse, and Jonas saw the man reaching for something inside his coat. The marshal saw it too. "Don't," Hayes warned, his rifle coming up. "Don't make this worse." But Reeves wasn't reaching for a weapon. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, and for a moment Jonas thought they were the forged documents. Then Reeves tore them in half, let them flutter to the ground, and smiled. "Good luck proving anything," Reeves said calmly. "Without evidence, this is all just hearsay and accusations." Jonas felt his heart sink. Had this all been for nothing? Had Sam's dangerous ride to Miller's Crossing failed? But then the marshal laughed, actually laughed, and Jonas saw genuine amusement in the man's weathered face. "That's where you're wrong, Reeves," Hayes said. "See, I received a very interesting package this morning. Documents, letters, ledgers, all detailing your various crimes. Came from a young man named Sam Reeves, actually. He delivered them personally to my office in Miller's Crossing before riding back here." The marshal patted his saddlebag. "Got copies, too, sent to every newspaper in the territory. You're finished, Reeves. Tearing up whatever you've got there won't change that." The color drained from Reeves's face. For the first time, his mask of control slipped, and Jonas saw the desperation underneath. The man looked around wildly, seeing only enemies, seeing his empire crumbling. "I have powerful friends," Reeves said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This won't stick. You'll hang," the marshal interrupted flatly. "For murder, if not for the land fraud. And your powerful friends? They're going to scatter like roaches when the light hits them. Nobody wants to be associated with a killer once the whole territory knows about it." It was over. Jonas felt the realization wash through him like cold water. They'd won. Somehow, impossibly, they'd won. He released Cole, who lay gasping in the dirt, blood streaming from his broken nose. Ellie pulled her knife back and ran to Sam, gathering her brother in her arms and sobbing openly. Jonas stood slowly, feeling the bullet wound in his side now that the adrenaline was fading. It hurt like hell, but the bullet had gone clean through. He'd live. They'd all live.
The marshal dismounted and walked over to Jonas, extending his hand. "Jonas Mercer, haven't seen you in years." Jonas shook the hand, confused. "You know me?" "We served together," Hayes said. "Different regiment, but same war. Mexican campaign, back in '47. You saved my life during that ambush outside Monterey, pulled me out of a ditch while I was bleeding out." Jonas stared at him, memories flooding back. He'd been so young then, barely 20 years old. The man he'd saved had been a corporal, eager and inexperienced. Jonas had nearly forgotten about it in all the years since. "You became a marshal," Jonas said. "Thanks to you," Hayes replied. "Gave me a chance to have a career, a family. When I got word about what was happening out here, about children being hunted and good men making a stand, well, I couldn't let that go unanswered. Figured I owed you one." "We're even now," Jonas said, though his voice was thick with emotion. Hayes looked around at the burned buildings, the wounded men, the bodies of those who hadn't survived. "Hell of a thing," he said quietly. "All this over greed." "Not over greed," Jonas corrected, looking at Ellie and Sam, at Jacob and the other ranchers who'd risked everything. "Over doing what's right, that's what made it worth fighting for." The marshal nodded slowly. "I suppose you're right at that." The wounded were tended first. Jonas refused treatment until everyone else had been seen to, despite the blood soaking through his shirt. Robert Chen's shoulder wound was serious but clean, and the marshal's men had a doctor among them who set to work with practiced efficiency. Danny Carson's leg would heal, though he'd walk with a limp for months. Sam's bruises looked worse than they were, and the doctor declared him remarkably lucky considering what he'd been through. Jonas finally allowed Ellie to help him with his own wound while the doctor was occupied. She worked silently, her hands steady as she cleaned the entry and exit wounds, packed them with clean cloth, and wrapped his torso tight. When she was done, she sat back and looked at him with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. "You could have died," she said quietly. "When you ran at Cole like that, you could have died." "So could Sam," Jonas replied. "So could you. That's what family does. We risk ourselves for each other." "We're not your family," Ellie said, but there was no conviction in the words. Jonas looked at this girl who'd appeared at his fence line barely a week ago, desperate and afraid, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for 6 years. "Maybe not by blood," he said, "but family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice, and I chose you and Sam the moment I opened my door." Ellie's composure cracked, and tears spilled down her cheeks. She'd been so strong, so determined to hold everything together that she'd forgotten how to let herself feel. Jonas pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of his wound, and let her cry against his shoulder while the chaos of the aftermath swirled around them. Marshal Hayes had his men round up Cole and the surviving hired guns. Reeves sat on his horse under guard, his expensive suit covered in dust, his expression oscillating between rage and disbelief. The man still couldn't quite grasp that his carefully constructed empire had collapsed in a single morning. "What happens now?" Jacob asked, approaching Jonas and Ellie. His own wound had been bandaged, and he looked exhausted but satisfied. "To the kids, I mean. What's their legal situation?" Jonas had been wondering the same thing. With their parents dead and Reeves arrested, Ellie and Sam were orphans. In the eyes of the law, they needed a guardian. The alternative was an orphanage or being farmed out to distant relatives who might not want them. "I'll need to speak with them," Marshal Hayes said, joining the conversation. He pulled out a worn notebook and pencil. "For the official record, get their testimony about what happened to their father, everything Reeves did." Sam appeared, limping slightly, but with his head held high. He'd stopped crying, and Jonas saw something different in the boy's eyes now. Not innocence, because that was gone forever, but a kind of hard-won strength. Sam had faced death and come through it. He'd never be quite the same, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The marshal spent an hour taking statements from both children. Jonas stayed close, watching as they recounted the murder of their father, the weeks of running, the constant fear. Ellie's voice remained steady throughout, but Sam broke down twice, and each time Ellie put her arm around him until he could continue. "That's good," Hayes said finally, closing his notebook. "This testimony, combined with the documents you provided, should be more than enough to convict Reeves. Cole, too, and any officials who took his bribes." "How long until trial?" Jonas asked. Couple months, probably. Territorial court moves slow. Hayes looked at the children with sympathy. You'll need to testify in person when the time comes. That going to be a problem? We'll be there, Ellie said firmly. We want everyone to hear what he did. Hayes nodded approvingly. You've got courage, both of you. Your father would be proud. He paused, then asked the question Jonas had been dreading. About your living situation. You have any relatives who could take you in? Ellie and Sam exchanged glances. Our mother had a sister in Kansas, Ellie said slowly. But we've never met her. Don't even know if she's still alive. I'll make inquiries, Hayes said, but that could take time. In the meantime, you'll need somewhere to stay. There's an orphanage in Silver Creek, or... They'll stay with me, Jonas interrupted. Everyone turned to look at him, and he felt his face flush. If they want to, I mean. I've got room, and they shouldn't have to uproot their lives any more than they already have. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You sure about that, Jonas? 2 children is a big responsibility. I had a daughter once, Jonas said quietly. I know what responsibility looks like, and I know what it feels like to fail at it. But I also know that these kids deserve better than being shipped off to strangers. They've already lost enough. The marshal studied Jonas for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll list you as temporary guardian until we can sort out the legal details. But Jonas, Hayes's voice turned serious. This isn't just about having room in your house. You'll need to feed them, clothe them, see to their education. Can you handle that? Jonas looked at Ellie and Sam. They were watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Hope mixed with wariness, fear mixed with desperate longing. They'd been betrayed by family before. Trusting again wouldn't come easy. I can handle it, Jonas said, if they'll have me. Sam spoke up, his voice small but certain. I'd like that, if Ellie agrees. Ellie took a shaky breath. You're sure? You barely know us. We come with trouble, Jonas. Reeves might be locked up, but he has friends. People who might come looking for revenge. Let them come, Jonas said simply. I'm done running from life, done hiding in my grief. You two reminded me what it means to fight for something worth keeping, so yes, I'm sure. Ellie's face crumpled, and she nodded, unable to speak. Sam moved to Jonas's side, and Jonas put his hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the weight of this new responsibility and finding it didn't frighten him the way he'd expected. Instead, it felt right, like pieces of his broken life were finally starting to fit back together. The marshal left an hour later, taking Reeves, Cole, and the prisoners with him. The surviving hired guns would face charges as accessories. Reeves and Cole would likely hang. Justice, slow but certain, was finally coming for them. The ranchers who'd fought that morning stayed to help clean up. The barn was a total loss, and Jacob's house had taken significant damage, but the men worked together with the kind of easy camaraderie born from shared hardship. They didn't talk much about the battle, didn't need to. Everyone who'd been there understood what they'd faced and what they'd accomplished. Paul Henderson approached Jonas as the sun climbed toward noon. You did good, Jonas. Standing up when it mattered. A lot of folks wouldn't have. A lot of folks did, Jonas corrected, gesturing at the men working around them. Without all of you, we'd be dead. This was everyone's fight. Maybe, Paul agreed, but you're the one who started it, the one who opened your door to strangers and decided their lives mattered more than your safety. That takes a special kind of courage. Jonas didn't feel courageous. He felt exhausted and sore and overwhelmed by everything that had happened, but he also felt something he hadn't experienced in years, purpose. He had a reason to get up tomorrow, a reason to rebuild, a reason to keep going. Ellie and Sam had given him that, and he'd spend whatever time he had left making sure they never regretted trusting him. By evening, the immediate crisis had passed. The bodies had been collected for burial. The worst of the damage had been assessed. Jacob insisted Jonas and the children stay at his place for the night, since Jonas's ranch still smelled of smoke and needed repairs. They gathered in Jacob's patched kitchen for a simple meal, beans and cornbread, coffee for the adults, milk for the children. The conversation was quiet, subdued by exhaustion and the emotional toll of the day. But there was also an undercurrent of relief, of tension, finally released. "What will you do?" Miguel asked Jonas. "About your ranch, I mean. The barn needs rebuilding. House needs work. That's a lot for one man. We'll help, Tom Whitmore said immediately, and the other ranchers nodded. We'll organize a barn raising, get everyone in the valley involved. Have you fixed up in a couple of weeks? Jonas felt his throat tighten. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, Jacob interrupted. We're offering. That's what neighbors do. The simple generosity nearly undid Jonas. He'd spent so long isolated, pushing people away, that he'd forgotten what community felt like. These men had fought beside him, bled beside him, and now they were offering to rebuild beside him. It was more than he deserved, but he found himself grateful beyond words. After dinner, Jonas found Ellie standing outside, staring up at the stars. The night was clear and cold, and her breath misted in the air. She'd wrapped herself in a blanket, but Jonas could still see her shivering. You should come inside, Jonas said gently. It's cold out here. I needed air, Ellie said, needed to think. Jonas stood beside her, giving her space but offering his presence. They watched the stars in silence for a while, and Jonas thought about all the nights Sarah had stood like this, finding peace in the vastness of the sky. Are you really sure, Ellie asked finally, about taking us in? You could still change your mind. Marshall would understand. I'm sure, Jonas said. But the question is, are you sure? You and Sam could go to Kansas, find your aunt, start fresh somewhere nobody knows your story. Ellie shook her head. Sam and I talked about it. Kansas is just a name we heard once. We don't know those people, but you... She paused, searching for words. You fought for us when you didn't have to. You risked everything. That means something. What about the ranch? Jonas asked. Your father's land. That's rightfully yours now. You could claim it, sell it, use the money for your future. Blood money, Ellie said bitterly. I don't want it. Let the territory have it or auction it off. I just want to forget it exists. Jonas understood that impulse, but he also knew the practical value of land. You don't have to decide now, he said, but think about it. That land represents your father's work, his dreams for you and Sam. Turning your back on it won't bring him back, but using it to build something good might honor his memory. Ellie considered this, then nodded slowly. Maybe. Someday. But not yet. They stood in companionable silence for a few more minutes before heading back inside. Sam had fallen asleep on Jacob's couch, and Ellie curled up beside him, protective even in rest. Jonas watched them for a moment, two children who'd survived the worst the world could throw at them and somehow still had the capacity to trust, to hope, to love. He thought about Emma, about the daughter he'd lost to despair and his own blindness. He couldn't save Emma. That failure would haunt him until his own death. But maybe, just maybe, he could save these two. And maybe in saving them, he could save himself. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to their word, the ranchers of the valley organized a barn raising at Jonas's place. More than 30 men showed up with tools and lumber, and in 3 days they'd erected a new barn, bigger and sturdier than the old one. Their wives brought food and helped repair the house, mending bullet holes and replacing shattered windows. Ellie and Sam threw themselves into the work with fierce determination. Ellie proved to have a natural talent for carpentry, her hands steady and precise. Sam, still recovering from his wound but refusing to sit idle, helped where he could and learned quickly. Jonas watched them find their place in this new life, watched them slowly relax as they realized they were truly safe. Anderson, the newspaper man, printed the full story of Reeves's crimes. Other papers across the territory picked it up, and suddenly everyone knew what had happened. Jonas received letters from strangers thanking him for his courage. He burned most of them, uncomfortable with the attention, but kept a few that seemed sincere. The trial came in late November, just as the first snow began to fall. Jonas accompanied Ellie and Sam to the territorial capital, where they testified before a packed courtroom. Ellie's voice never wavered as she described watching her father die. Sam broke down on the stand, but the jury seemed to understand, seemed to feel the weight of what these children had endured. Reeves sat through it all with barely concealed contempt, still convinced his money and connections would save him. Cole looked resigned, like he'd known from the moment of his capture how this would end. When the jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, Reeves finally understood.
The color drained from his face, and he aged 10 years in an instant. The judge sentenced them both to hang. Reeves immediately filed appeals that would take months or years to exhaust.
Cole surprisingly waived his right to appeal. When asked why, he simply said he was tired of running. The hanging was scheduled for December. Jonas didn't attend the execution. Neither did Ellie and Sam. They'd already spent too much of their lives focused on Reeves and his evil. The day Cole and Reeves died, Jonas took the children to visit Sarah and Emma's graves on the hill overlooking his ranch. He'd avoided this place for 6 years, unable to face the evidence of his failures. But now, with Ellie and Sam standing beside him, he found he could finally stand there without breaking apart. He told them about Sarah, her laugh, her strength, her insistence on seeing beauty even in hard times. He told them about Emma, her curiosity, her kindness, her terrible loneliness that he'd been too blind to see. "I think they would have liked you," Jonas said quietly. "Sarah would have fussed over you both, made sure you were eating enough. Emma would have taught you about all the places she loved to explore on this land." "Do you think they'd mind?" Sam asked. "Us being here, I mean. In their home." Jonas thought about that. Would Sarah mind? Would Emma? He didn't know for certain, but he thought he knew what they'd say if they could. Sarah would tell him to stop wallowing in the past and embrace the second chance he'd been given. Emma would tell him she was glad he'd finally found a way to be happy again. "No," Jonas said firmly. "I don't think they'd mind at all. I think they'd be glad." Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and cold winds. But inside the house, warmth grew. Jonas taught Sam how to care for horses, how to mend tack, how to read weather in the sky. Ellie learned to cook from recipes Sarah had left behind, adding her own touches, making the kitchen come alive again with good smells and laughter. They established routines, breakfast together every morning, evening meals where they talked about their days, Sunday rides around the property, to check fences and enjoy the land. They built a life, piece by careful piece, learning to be a family. It wasn't perfect. Ellie had nightmares about her father's death for months. Sam startled at loud noises and sometimes woke up crying. Jonas found himself terrified every time they left his sight, convinced something terrible would happen. But they worked through it together, learning to lean on each other instead of carrying everything alone. Spring came, bringing green grass and wildflowers. Jacob and the other ranchers helped Jonas plant crops and expand his herd. The ranch began to thrive in ways it hadn't since Sarah's death. Jonas hired a hand to help with the heavy work, a young man named Thomas, who treated Ellie and Sam with respectful kindness and never asked questions about their past. In April, a letter arrived from Kansas. Ellie's aunt had been located, and she wrote expressing her deep sorrow for what had happened. She offered to take the children if they wished, to provide them a home among blood family. Jonas read the letter with his heart in his throat, terrified they'd choose to leave. But Ellie barely hesitated. "This is our home now," she said simply. "You're our family, if that's still okay with you." Jonas had to turn away so they wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. "It's more than okay," he managed to say. "It's everything." The legal paperwork came through in May. Jonas officially became Ellie and Sam's guardian, their names added to his legal documents, their futures tied to his. He hired a lawyer to help Ellie reclaim her father's land, not to sell it, but to hold it in trust until she was old enough to decide what to do with it. The land that had been soaked in blood and greed could someday be transformed into something good. Summer brought a new project. Sam, who'd been sleeping in what used to be Jonas's study, needed a proper room. Together, the three of them built an addition onto the house, a small bedroom with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. They worked side by side, measuring and cutting, hammering and painting. And when it was finished, Sam stood in his new room with tears streaming down his face. "Nobody's ever built anything for me before," he said. "Just for me." "Your family," Jonas said, the words coming easier each time he said them. "Family takes care of each other." One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ellie asked Jonas a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Do you ever regret it, taking us in? Your life would be so much simpler if you just sent us away that first night." Jonas thought about it seriously, wanting to give her an honest answer. "My life was simpler before you came," he said. It was also emptier, lonelier. I was just going through motions, waiting to die. You and Sam reminded me what it means to be alive, to care about something beyond my own pain. So no, I don't regret it. Not for a second. Even though we brought so much trouble, Sam added from where he sat whittling a piece of wood. Trouble was worth it, Jonas said firmly. You were worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, worth everything. The boy smiled and went back to his whittling, but Jonas saw the way his shoulders relaxed, saw the tension he hadn't even known he was carrying finally ease. September came around again, marking a full year since that fateful evening when two desperate children had appeared at Jonas's fence line. The anniversary didn't pass unnoticed. Jonas woke that morning to find Ellie and Sam had made breakfast, eggs and bacon, coffee just the way he liked it, even biscuits that were only slightly burned. "What's this?" Jonas asked, touched by the gesture. "Anniversary," Ellie said. "1 year since you changed our lives." "Since you changed mine," Jonas corrected. But he sat down and ate the breakfast they'd made, and his heart felt fuller than it had in longer than he could remember. That afternoon, they rode together to the hollow cottonwood tree where Jonas had hidden the documents all those months ago. They retrieved the oilskin pouch, no longer needed now that justice had been served, and stood together looking at the papers that had nearly cost them everything. "What should we do with them?" Sam asked. Jonas looked at Ellie. "Your call. They're your father's legacy, in a way." Ellie held the papers for a long moment, then walked to a nearby fire pit Jonas had used for camping trips with Emma years ago. She struck a match, held it to the papers, and watched them burn. "That's the past," she said as the flames consumed the evidence of Reeves's crimes. "We don't need to carry it anymore." They watched the papers turn to ash, watched the smoke rise into the clear blue sky. When nothing remained but gray powder, they rode back to the ranch, home, in peaceful silence. The months that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Ellie turned 17 and began helping Jonas run the ranch in earnest, her sharp mind grasping the economics of cattle and crops with impressive speed. Sam, growing like a weed, discovered a talent for horse training that left Jonas marveling at the boy's patience and instinct. They celebrated Christmas together, the first real Christmas Jonas had acknowledged since Emma died. They cut a tree from the north pasture and decorated it with ornaments Sarah had made years ago. They exchanged simple gifts and sang carols badly and laughed until their sides hurt. It was imperfect and chaotic and absolutely wonderful. Winter gave way to spring again, the cycle continuing. The ranch prospered, the children grew. And Jonas found himself waking each morning with something he hadn't had in 6 years: gratitude for the day ahead. One evening in early summer, as they worked together to repair a fence line that had been damaged in a storm, Sam paused and looked at Jonas seriously. "Can I ask you something?" the boy said. "Of course." "When we first came here, you said someone once helped you. You said that's why you helped us. Who was it?" Jonas leaned on the fence post, remembering. "Man named Henry Clayton. Years ago, before you were born, I was traveling with my wife, Sarah. She was pregnant with our daughter. We got caught in a snowstorm, lost our supplies in a river crossing. We would have died if Henry hadn't taken us in, no questions asked. He gave us shelter for a week while Sarah recovered her strength." "Did you ever repay him?" Ellie asked, joining the conversation. "Never got the chance," Jonas said quietly. "He died a couple years later. I always felt like I owed a debt I couldn't repay. Until you two showed up. Henry taught me that kindness doesn't need repayment. It just needs to be passed forward." "So we should pass it forward too?" Sam asked. "Someday," Jonas agreed. "When someone else needs help, when you have the power to make a difference, that's when you pay back what was given to you." They finished the fence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and amber. Walking back to the house, Jonas found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The pain and loss that had nearly destroyed him. The desperate children who'd appeared when he'd needed them most. The battle that had tested them all. The slow, careful process of building something new from the wreckage of old lives. That night, as Jonas lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house, Ellie moving quietly in the kitchen, Sam laughing at something in his room, the familiar creaks and groans of old wood, he thought about the words he'd spoken to Ellie a year ago. Sometimes saving others is the only way to save yourself. He'd saved 2 children from murder and despair, and in doing so, they'd saved him from grief and isolation. It was a fair trade, he thought, more than fair. Years passed. Ellie grew into a formidable woman, strong and capable, taking over more and more of the ranch operations until Jonas was comfortable stepping back and letting her lead. She never married, though she had suitors. The ranch was her passion, and she poured herself into it with fierce dedication. Sam grew tall and broad-shouldered, his easy smile and gentle way with animals making him popular throughout the valley. He did eventually marry a teacher from Silver Creek named Rebecca, who loved his quiet strength and didn't mind that he sometimes woke with nightmares about a past he rarely discussed. Jonas grew old, his hair turning fully white, his steps slowing. But he never lost the spark that Ellie and Sam had rekindled in him that September night so many years ago. He worked the ranch until his body couldn't anymore, then sat on the porch and watched his family continue the work he'd started. On quiet evenings, visitors to the ranch would notice a shelf by the kitchen window, simple pine, carefully crafted, showing signs of age but still sturdy. If they asked about it, Ellie would smile and say it was the first thing they'd built together as a family, back when they were still learning what family meant. Jonas Mercer died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71, surrounded by the people he loved. They buried him on this hill next to Sarah and Emma, and the entire valley turned out for the funeral. Ellie and Sam spoke about the man who'd opened his door to strangers, who'd fought for them when the world said it was foolish, who taught them that family was about choice as much as blood. Years later, when Ellie herself was old and gray, watching Sam's grandchildren play in the yard of the ranch she'd protected and grown, she would think about that desperate September night. She'd think about the rancher with storm cloud eyes who'd asked just one question. "Can we sleep in your barn?" And she'd think about his answer, the answer that had changed everything. "Barn's cold. There's a room inside." Such a simple choice, such profound consequences. Jonas Mercer had been a broken man when they'd met him, hollowed out by grief, waiting to die. But he'd made the choice to care anyway, to open his door and his heart to 2 desperate children. And in that choice, he'd found redemption. The shelf still stood by the kitchen window, weathered but unbroken, a testament to the family they'd built from nothing but determination and love. Visitors still asked about it, and the answer was always the same. It came from the man who opened his door and his heart. Because in the West, sometimes saving others truly is the only way to save yourself. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people you save will save you right back. The land stretched out toward distant mountains, just as it always had. Cattle grazed in green pastures. Fences stood strong against the wind. And in the house Jonas Mercer had built with Sarah all those years ago, life continued, messy and beautiful and exactly as it should be. The story that had begun with a desperate question at dusk had become a legacy of hope, of courage, of choosing to care even when caring cost everything. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through generations. And on clear September evenings, when the light turned golden and the wind carried memories on its breath, you could almost see them, Jonas and Sarah and Emma, Ellie and Sam, all the souls who'd walked this land and loved it and fought for it. Their spirits woven into the very ground, their choices echoing forward through time, reminding everyone who came after that kindness matters, that courage matters, that opening your door to strangers might just be the thing that saves you both. The West had been harsh to Jonas Mercer. It had taken nearly everything from him. But in the end, it had also given him back more than he'd lost. A second chance, a new family, a reason to wake up grateful for each day. He'd opened his door to 2 children running from death, and they'd brought him back to life. That was the real story. Not the gunfight or the legal battle or the victory over evil. Those were just chapters. The real story was about a lonely man finding purpose again, about orphaned children finding home again, about all of them discovering that family wasn't something you were born into, but something you chose to build, piece by careful piece. And years after Jonas was gone, after Ellie had passed the ranch to Sam's children, after the names had faded but the story remained, people still told it. They told it to teach their children about courage. They told it to remind themselves why kindness mattered. They told it because some stories are too important to forget. The shelf by the kitchen window stayed exactly where it was, holding coffee cups and wildflowers, books, and small treasures. A simple piece of furniture built by broken people learning to be whole again. A monument to the truth that sometimes, when you open your door to save someone else, you end up saving yourself. And on the hill where Jonas Mercer rested beside his beloved Sarah and their daughter Emma, the cottonwood trees grew tall and strong, their leaves whispering stories to anyone willing to listen. Stories about love and loss, about grief and redemption, about the choice to care even when caring seemed impossible. The rancher had opened his door. He had opened his heart. And in doing so, he had proved that second chances weren't just possible. They were worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, worth everything. That was the legacy. That was what mattered. And as long as the ranch stood, as long as the story was told, Jonas Mercer's choice would continue to echo through time. A reminder that in the darkest moments, a single act of kindness could change everything. The sun set over the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The land endured. The family thrived. And somewhere, in the space between memory and hope, Jonas Mercer smiled. He had found his way home. They all had.